Hello everyone, welcome to What If Naruto Had Solo Leveling Powers in Konoha Part 4. Before we start, please go support Kira Uzumaki-1 for writing that awesome fanfic. Now let's begin. This is the translated version I made. There will be some wrong he or she calling here because it's translated, so let me clear this. Naruto is a male in this story. Chapter 23. The next morning, while preparing breakfast, he seriously thought about what to do. Maybe it was better to tell the Hokage. How? He didn't have an answer to that. He should wait after completing the change. Yes, it was the best. I'm going to train, the blonde says. I can go with you? Hikari asks with bright eyes. Yesterday you told me that you had to meet with your team for another mission. He looks at her, seriously. Ugh, the missions are horrible. I don't understand how they can exist. What is the use of all these assignments? She says stubbornly. They serve to give the new genin an idea of how the ninja world is run, to improve teamwork and communication. Above all, it would be suicide to send them to face enemies as soon as they leave the academy, he explains seriously. I should eat spicy ramen or tonkatsu ramen, the redhead murmurs hesitantly. Hikari the blonde shouts angrily. I have to go, little brother, the girl says nervously. In a whirlwind the miner runs to her room to pick up her tools and, in less than a rooster's crowing, she left the apartment. A small twitch appeared on the older man's face. Naruto lets out a long sigh. There was no point in getting angry with his sister, he was the same way when he barely left the academy. Since his father was the Hokage, every time he was home he asked her to give him a super mission, but the man was inflexible. He decided to prepare for the mission. If it was as usual then he wouldn't be able to use chakra. It was best to have some soldier pills, which despite not being as useful as a potion, he couldn't see filling his stomach with liquid. The blonde looked around. There was no one. He was in the middle of the Konoha forest. To cover all possibilities, he had chosen a secluded place. The time was 1744. There was no one at this time. Just in case he had chosen the most secluded place. Should I start? Naruto opened the message box. The mission job change has appeared. Would you like to accept? Yes or no? As if waiting for him, the message appeared in front of his eyes. Even after all of his progress, Uzumaki couldn't help but be worried about what was to come. However, his excitement over the anticipated growth overshadowed his fear. A moment ago, while he was looking for a suitable place to start the mission, Naruto had not used his time to research in the library. New skill. Growth benefits. Class-specific weapons. Solo class missions. Eck. But he didn't find anything that could relate to his situation. Hell, there wasn't even anything like leveling up or choosing a class. The blonde was frustrated with the situation, it was practically all on the fly. Naruto wasn't all that worried about the class he was going to get. He had exclusively used a dagger until now, and even his skills were related to an assassin class. Dagger skills and stealth mode. On top of that, his attributes were largely focused on strength and agility. Because of this, the ninja could not think of obtaining a class other than the one he possessed. Thinking about the idea, Uzumaki took out Risaka's poison fang from his inventory. The grip of the dagger felt perfect in his hand. Yes, this is what I'm used to. He thought to himself. But the dagger in hand, he moved his gaze towards the search screen. Well then. He began to plan as many possibilities as possible. After taking a moment to prepare his heart, Naruto responded to the message. The mission job change has appeared. Would you like to accept? But, accept. The moment she said the word in his mind, a message appeared in front of him. You have accepted the job change mission. A dungeon will be created for the quest. Will a dungeon be created? Before he could fully comprehend the meaning of the message, a change occurred in the space before him. A small black hole appeared before his eyes, but that was just the beginning. The hole that was as small as a pimple grew to the size of a coin, then a volleyball, and finally became large enough for a man to enter. This is. The shinobi's blue eyes were open. After accepting the mission, he had expected a screen with the information of the mission he accepted, but not this. A portal had formed before his eyes. And to think that he would create a portal for me, he thinks in amazement. The phenomenon in front of him was exactly the same as the portals that appeared in the world. The only difference was that this one was a little smaller than the ones he had seen. The system prompt continued, let's think calmly. Naruto calmed his heart. Yes. If he thought about it, if he entered using a key or through a portal, a dungeon would be waiting on the other side. He was just surprised by the creation of an artificial portal before his eyes. While he had entered many portals before, he had never seen one created. When he came to that line of thought, an idea appeared in his head. Wait, could other people enter this portal? Well, there was no time to experiment. There was no other soul in the vicinity, nor did he know of any shinobi who would come running if he called. The system message flashed as if it reminded him. Uzumaki was brought back to reality by the electronic tone. He slapped his cheeks to focus. Now is not the time to get distracted. Success in this would mean obtaining a class and other rewards. He feared what failure would entail. He had to be focused. Phew. After a deep breath, the blonde held Risaka's poison fang in reverse and entered the portal. You have entered a dungeon, hey? He murmurs absent-mindedly. To be honest, he had entered the portal with great expectation. Contrary to his expectations, there wasn't much to be surprised inside. It was just a simple dungeon cave. It's the same as always. He had heard that high-level portals would have different types of interiors and he expected something similar, but he was disappointed. However, a special message did appear. In this place, the use of potions and the store are restricted and leveling up will not restore the status of it. The shinobi put away the dagger after confirming that there were no magical beasts around. It seems like this won't be easy, he thinks seriously. Since this was a special class advancement dungeon, there seemed to be some conditions. The fact that he couldn't heal himself through potions or leveling up was particularly worrying. That means even small damage adds up over time. An injury could mean the end here. Without means of recovery, he would have to be careful with every move he made. Really, I have to stay focused. Naruto closed the message box. As always, he checked the exit from the dungeon. Until his job change is complete, he cannot leave. The moment he put his hand on the portal, that message appeared. He turned his back to her, but the exit did not disappear. He removed his hand from him. So the way back is blocked. He had yet to figure out the difficulty of the dungeon. Furthermore, he couldn't recover his health here. Lastly, he couldn't leave until he finished his mission. The risk this time was very high. Even the bravest of shinobi would hesitate before entering such conditions. But high risk didn't necessarily mean something bad, the blonde thinks. High risk resulted in high rewards. He had learned so much from his experiences. If all these conditions made the mission more difficult, perhaps a great reward awaited at the end as well. Well, there was only one way to find out. Time to move on. Naruto began to walk deeper into the cave. He couldn't see the end of the tunnel, and at the same time he didn't see or feel any magical beasts. Wait, since this is the territory of the system, they must be monsters and not magical beasts. In the end, they were both dangerous beings. There was a difference in this place compared to the normal dungeon caves. The walls of the cave were decorated with torches, placed evenly across the access route. Torches instead of glowing rocks. Torches were not an effective source of light. Even if there were many of them, it was not enough to completely illuminate a dark tunnel. As such, the flickering light produced many shadows here and there. The combination of shadows and silence produced a very boring atmosphere compared to a normal dungeon. Well, I don't have any problem seeing, he thinks out loud. What bothered her was the impact it had on his mood. Uzumaki walked over and removed the torch closer to the wall. The path forward just got a little brighter. That's better. Naruto smiled with satisfaction. He took a brief look behind him and then started forward again with torch in hand. How long have I been walking this straight path? After some time, he finally came across a turn. Around the corner he felt several presences. Finally. He carefully dropped the torch to the ground. In the place where the torch was, he now carried a dagger. He briefly considered using stealth mode to gain a preemptive advantage, but decided to conserve his mana. Potions couldn't be used after all. If he inadvertently drained his mana, he might not be able to use a skill at a crucial moment. They come this way. Naruto hugged the wall with his back and then waited for the enemies to turn around the corner. A metallic sound sounded as they walked towards him. The sound was getting closer and closer. Because of the crashing sound, the blonde wondered. Are they carrying some kind of chain weapon? He was curious, but he didn't worry. He would find them in a moment. He kept his dagger in a reverse grip and held his breath. He didn't want the sound of his breathing to be heard. As shadows appeared around the corner. When the shinobi finished the countdown, they appeared. Naruto immediately aimed for his neck. The sound of metal hitting metal rang out loudly. The dagger failed to pierce the target. Armor? The ninja was surprised. He confirmed the identity of his enemy and quickly walked away. Human? He was a knight equipped with a full set of armor. Even his face was covered by a helmet. Just in case, Uzumaki spoke up. Hey. The knight reacted by charging towards him. The knight vigorously used his shoulders to try to confront Naruto, but the ninja easily twisted his body to dodge the attack. The knight could not stop his momentum and ran forward until he stopped. Isn't he human? It is questioned. After expanding his sense of it a little more, the young man was sure. The knight didn't have a heartbeat. He was a magical beast, or, rather, a monster that he had never seen before. And to think there would be a monster covered from head to toe in armor. It was almost as if he was fighting another human being. The knight turned around and drew the sword at his side. As Naruto thought, he had no intention of letting him leave alive. Confirming each other's hostility, blue eyes crinkled. Sprint. Your movement speed is increased by 40%. Whoever strikes the first blow would win before the knight managed to reach him. I entered his attack range. The shinobi dodged his panic swing and stabbed into his armor. But he couldn't do any harm. The armor is too thick. Not only that, it could almost be described as slippery. His dagger helplessly pierced the armor and was deflected every time he struck. The knight turned his sword in a horizontal line. Naruto lowered his head to dodge. The blade of the sword passed just inches above his head. Since his attack was powerful, the opening created after missing was equally huge. He missed the opportunity. Still in close combat range, Uzumaki focused all of his strength on his dagger. Life stab. Crack. The dagger pierced the armor. It worked. However, as if it did no harm, the knight ignored the dagger protruding from his side and lowered the sword in a vertical line. Naruto threw his body back. Sparks flew from the ground where the sword hit. The blonde straightened up after taking a few steps back. Arasaka's poisoned knife was still stuck next to the knight. Naruto clicked his tongue. He's not exactly strong. That was true. Due to his armor, the knight was slow. Not only that, his attack pattern was quite simple. The main obstacle was his tough resistance to edged weapons. The shinobi rolled up his shirt sleeves. I already have some experience, and I know that, if it is thick armor, a blade will not be able to pass through. His maintained composure. He remembered the chi scales that effortlessly shattered from the power infused into his hands. He remembered how he took care of that giant snake. Compared to Arasaka, this bastard is nothing. Thinking of the first boss he had defeated, Naruto smiled in nostalgia. The knight, confident in his armor, charged at him once more. As expected, he is not that smart. The blonde easily dodged the knight's shoulder lunge, maneuvered behind his back and put him in a headlock. Of course, his neck was also armored, it's likely that he didn't choke on this alone. Naruto's arms flexed, showing his veins. He wasn't trying to drown the gentleman. He gritted his teeth and his wide eyes lit up. But the sickening sound, he tore off the helmet. This was the power of the strength stat that had reached above 100. Having lost his mind, the knight knelt on the ground. You have defeated knight. The pleasant sound of a message marked the end of the fight. Although there was a light that indicated material coming from the knight's corpse, the blonde was focused on something else. So he's empty. There was no head on the helmet he was holding. He also looked inside the armor he was kneeling at, but it also turned out to be empty. So he was fighting in walking armor. Coming to that conclusion, two more knights appeared around the corner. It seemed like they had finally realized that there was a fight. Having discovered the shinobi, the two knights drew their swords in unison. Naruto tossed his helmet aside, stretched his neck and shoulders. He knew the method to defeat them now. Should we start? The blonde smiled at the approaching knights. The mission is going without problem so far. Was it because of the restrictions? The material drop rate was good. He had only finished off 3 knights, but only 2 of them had dropped materials. It was a drop rate of 66.6%. I hadn't seen a rate like that before. On top of that, most of the items dropped in instant dungeons were junk that was sold to the shop. This was not the case here. You have found high-level knight breastplate. Do you want to purchase it? But, of course. The breastplate of the first knight that Uzumaki took out slowly disappeared and then reappeared in front of his feet. The equipment information appeared. High-level knight breastplate. Rarity. B. Type. Armor. Physical damage reduction plus 7%. If you have strength below 80, your movements will be slowed down. 7% physical damage reduction. Combined with his 20% reducing skin, together they could increase his damage reduction to a total of 27%. If I reach 100%, would I become immune to physical damage? He scrapped the idea after realizing that a B-rank team only gave 7%. If the effect pattern was rank-based, a rank A equipment probably wouldn't give 30% or 40% reduction, so reaching 100% would be impossible. Still, every percentage counts, he thinks. Gradually increasing collections would have a great impact on your life. He lifted the breastplate. As expected, the system prompted him with a message. Do you want to equip high-level knight breastplate? Just looking at the armor, he realized that it was not something he would like to be seen in. If it weren't for his experiences with the Guardian's necklace, he would have been much more hesitant. Yeah. High-level knight breastplate has been equipped. The shell was invisible to the eye. Naruto opened his status screen to confirm the benefits. Physical damage reduction. 27%. The reduction increased. He touched his chest, but he didn't feel anything there. He turned and stretched his body, but he couldn't feel the armor. It was almost as if he wasn't there. It was the same as the time he equipped the Guardian's necklace. Uzumaki turned his gaze to the other knight, crumpled in the corner. The crushed form of him gave off a light. You have found leather bag. Do you want to purchase it? But, even though it was the work of his hands, he felt a little bad seeing the mangled body. It seemed like he couldn't control his strength when using his bare hands in a fight. With a solemn expression, he extended a hand to the light. You have opened the leather bag. There are 30,000 gold inside. You have acquired 30,000 gold. Hey? Without even appearing in his hands, he had just opened the leather bag. Apparently, this was a little different from the other materials. He opened his inventory and confirmed that he had received 30,000 gold. Current gold. 863,400. 30,000 at once, eh? Was it because gentlemen normally carry so much? He remembered that some bandits often dropped more items than the others. Well, it made sense that humans carried more stuff than shinobi. Not that he was sure the system was copying all of that. Still, this was good news. There were still many things that he wanted to buy with gold, and it would be nice if the gold kept coming in this way. Anything else I can have? They say there was no end to man's greed. Naruto looked around with greedy eyes. The knight's armors were crushed by his hands and did not look usable. His gaze fell on his swords. That looks usable. A clean long sword that looked new. Since it wasn't a dagger, he didn't plan on using it, but he could probably sell it at the store or to other shinobi. Uzumaki picked up the sword. However, the moment he picked up the weapon, it quickly rusted and then turned into dust in his hands. Shit, the blonde curses. It happened in the blink of an eye. Won't you let me get anything if it's not an item? It was unfortunate, but there was nothing he could do. She clapped her hands and picked up the torch she had dropped earlier. Turning the corner, where the knights had come from, he saw another deep dark tunnel. It seemed like there was still a long way to go. It was fun, but it almost seemed like he had to study the matches as a test. Chapter 24. After 2 hours of going through the dungeon, he had come across 4 types of monsters. Knights, magicians, assassins and archers. You use stealth mode this time. The murderer had disappeared before his eyes. Without panicking, Naruto immediately focused on his senses and detected the enemy approaching from behind. The shinobi parried the assassin's dagger with Risaka's poison fang, then quickly counterattacked after he lost his balance. His dagger found its way directly to the enemy's chest. You have defeated assassin. You have leveled up. After receiving a fatal blow, the assassin without even letting out a scream turned into black smoke. All that was left in his place was the leather armor he wore. I wonder why they are all humanoids, Uzumaki thought that every time he defeated one of them. Fortunately, he couldn't see their faces when they fought. The knights had their helmets, the assassins and archers had leather hoods, and the magicians covered their heads with the hood of their tunic. The blonde turned to continue on his way. Suddenly, a flash blinded his vision. A mage concealing his presence had completed by invoking his fire element spell. But he had already moved behind the wizard. The wizard detected a presence behind him and quickly began to cast a spell, but Naruto had already lowered his dagger on him. The magician disappeared in black smoke. Uzumaki looked at the cloak his owner lost and put away his dagger. He was able to dodge it because he was already hit by such an attack before. In fact, he was already preparing to dodge when he felt the agglomeration of mana in the distance. The Samu's fire element ninjutsu. Naruto wasn't naive enough to get hit again by an attack he already knew about. This was the meaning of studying confrontations. Not only that, each of the monsters needed a specific stat to deal with. Knights with strength, assassins with sense, archers and wizards with agility and constitution. If the appropriate stat was not above a certain level, dealing with the corresponding enemy would have been very difficult. With low strength, he would not have been able to damage the knight's armor. With low sense, he would not have been able to detect the murderer. It seems that the distribution of my statistics is useful for situations like this. Although his intelligence was a bit low, but he could protect himself by managing his mana carefully. You have opened the leather bag. There are 20,000 gold inside and a canteen with warm water. You have acquired 20,000 gold and a canteen of water. Uzumaki opened his inventory, took out the canteen and drank from it. Ugh, fatigue was accumulating. How much longer do I have to continue? No, is there even an ending? He dropped the empty canteen and stood with his hands on his hips. It had been 3 hours since he had started the mission. Both his body and mind were getting tired. Should I rest a little? He questioned himself in his head. He sat with his back against the cave wall. Status screen, he whispers. Fatigue. 66. His fatigue had almost reached a dangerous point. Above 70, he would have a noticeable disadvantage in his body and mind. At least for a moment, he had to rest his eyes and regain his stamina. The shinobi rested his head against the wall and quickly began to doze. Even in this environment, he was so tired that he would fall asleep at one point. Unfortunately, a sharp sound pierced the air. With his world-slowing agility stat, Naruto was able to catch the arrow flying towards him. The ninja's eyes widened. At a distance, an archer was preparing his next shot. It doesn't even let me sleep, huh? He summoned Risaka's poison fang. The armor sank in the blonde's blow, and the knight collided against the wall. His body slid and ended up on the ground. You have defeated knight. You have leveled up. It was unfortunate that it came accompanied by a recovery state, but Naruto still constantly leveled up through battles. It was a small comfort amidst the accumulation of fatigue. The man stared at his slightly scratched knuckles and clicked his tongue. It would be nice if he could get some rest, but the monsters weren't giving him any respite. Fortunately, they dropped a lot of items. Equipment: Guardian Necklace A, Knight's High-Level Breastplate B, Assassin's Mid-Level Shoes B, Archer's Low-Level Gloves C, Mage High-Level Ring B. Aside from what he had equipped himself with, there were various items that he put into his inventory as well. I'd like them to drop a usable weapon. Unfortunately, the assassin's daggers, although they had an attack power similar to that of Risaka's Poison Fang, did not have any special effect, so they could not be considered an advancement. Very well, what do you have? Naruto stretched out a hand towards the light of the fallen knight. High-level Knight Gauntlet. Rarity: B. Type: Armor. Physical damage reduction plus 3%. Additional effect: protects hands from injury. If your strength is less than 80, you will become slower when moving. He obtained the gauntlets with a happy expression and equipped them. Like the rest of the equipment, the gauntlets did not show his shape and did not impede the mobility of his fingers. After moving his fingers around him, the ninja raised his head. In front of him, the torches that lined the wall finally ended. At its end was a giant door. Uzumaki remembered the entrance to the underground temple from back then. His group was not prepared and met a tragic fate upon passing that door. It would be different this time. He looked back at the path he had taken so far. It's been 6 hours since he came in here. His level had reached 45, he had collected a lot of new equipment. He was prepared. He wanted to get some rest and regain his stamina, but he knew that would call for more monsters to disrupt his sleep. He couldn't afford to increase his fatigue through such encounters. HP: 45 11 83 30. MP: 660 790. Fatigue: 43. He had to win with just this. After making a final check on his condition, Naruto grabbed the doorknobs. The doors opened easily as if moved by some hidden mechanism. The doors to the boss room opened. The inside of the room was dark. Despite his very high sense stat, it was difficult for him to see inside. All he could see was the part in front of him at his feet. The floor was perfectly aligned with stone slabs. The gray stones gave off a cold sensation compared to the heat of his body. The moment he stepped onto those flagstones, the numerous torches that lined the inside of the room lit up. As I thought, it's the same as the underground temple. I couldn't let my guard down. He approached cautiously while observing his surroundings. The sides of the room contained giant pillars, and at the deep end of the room was a large throne. This reminds me of. It resembled a king's throne room he had seen in a movie. Although, the size was quite different. After she took a few steps into the room, the doors closed with a loud sound. She took a look back, but didn't panic. She had already predicted it. She kept going. The blonde noticed a strong presence. He felt that to finish the class advancement mission, he would have to reach the throne ahead. That kind of thinking had worked so far, but he was wrong this time. As he approached the throne, an armored form hidden behind a column revealed itself and slowly moved in front of him, blocking his path. He knew he was the boss. His name in red letters, floating above his head, told him the same thing. Captain of the Knights, Blood Red Igris. He was a knight wearing red armor. His armor was the same as the knights he had faced before, but compared to those clumsy enemies, this one seemed much more agile. What caught Naruto's attention was his helmet. The upper part of the helmet was decorated with plumage. A plumage of red hair that started from the top of the helmet and fell back, resembled a horse's tail. As he looked over the helmet, the blonde noticed something else. Does he have eyes? He thinks in amazement. Or rather, in the place where a person's eyes should be, the opening of the helmet shone with 2 silver lights. His eyes were a light emission from a machine and gave off a cold feeling. Those eyes were looking at Naruto. He lifted the hair on the back of his neck. A thought floods the blonde head. So this is the owner of the powerful presence. Maybe defeating him was the goal of the job change mission. If that were the case, Uzumaki should be careful. He kept an eye on Igris's movements and raised his fists. What was needed to defeat a knight was destructive power. So he would need his strength. While Igris was looking at Naruto, he suddenly removed his red cloak from him. The cape fell to the ground. His strange behavior didn't stop there. The knight took out the long sword, the 2 daggers from its sides, and threw them to the ground, one at a time. It was a slow and deliberate act. It was a message to Naruto. The silence of the boss's room was broken by the loud sounds of metal falling on the stone slabs. Once his weapons were discarded, Igris raised his fists and took a combat stance, imitating the hunter. His blue eyes widened. This bastard. He murmurs inaudibly. Was he going to fight him in hand-to-hand combat because he didn't have a weapon? The shinobi bit his lips. Was I underestimating him? The monster had managed to mock Naruto without using a skill. However, he kept his focus. The angrier he got, the colder he got too. Compared to the increased speed of his heartbeat, the Uzumaki's eyes shone sharply. Come. As if reading his mind, Igris charged at him in a straight line. It was an unthinkable speed for an armored being. My armor said that strength less than 80 would result in a movement penalty. That meant that the opponent's strength was at least 80. On top of that, the knight's movements revealed that his agility was not below that of a high-ranking shinobi. Igris reached the ninja and jumped. The knight aimed a knee at the blonde. It's fast. But he was not willing to lose speed. He leaned his body back at a 90-degree angle and dodged Igris's attack. He quickly lifted his body and turned to the boss. Unlike knights who lost their momentum and continued after losing their charge, Igris immediately turned around after landing. There was no time to be impressed by his clean moves. Naruto quickly ran towards Igris before he turned around completely and attacked with a kick to the face. However, even as he turned, the knight precisely moved his arm. Uzumaki's right leg was easily stopped by Igris's left hand. Impossible, the Jounin was surprised. While Naruto's leg was still in the air, Igris's fist flew straight towards him. The shinobi reflexively raised both arms to protect himself but could not completely block the impact. The blow broke through his guard and he felt his body being thrown into the air. "That!" he exclaimed in shock, but the sound of his mouth quickly turned into a moan. Igris was already right in front of his eyes. Before he could react, his face was met by the knight's left fist. The shinobi bounced off the floor and rolled across the room. When he finally stopped and stood up, the blonde's ears were ringing. He shook his head several times and the ringing relaxed a little. However, there was a bigger problem looming. Through his blurred vision, Naruto saw Igris walking towards him. Step by step, Uzumaki opened her eyes wide and focused on the strength of his legs. Igris stopped an arm's length away from him. A fight began between the pair. Igris made no attempt to dodge the enemy's attacks on him. He grabbed the man's fist and counterattacked with his own. The knight's head turned slightly. Even before Naruto's hand retracted after the attack, the knight was striking with blinding speed. The young man's body swayed. This time, Igris took a step back. The knight's fists hit Naruto's stomach, he leaned over them. Blood was coming out of the man's mouth. This compared to physical damage reduction. Uzumaki's physical damage reduction was at almost 30% with his equipment. But each of Igris's blows hurt like the blows of a hammer. On the other hand, it didn't seem like his own attacks did much damage to the knight. The couple's exchange did not last long. Naruto shook himself and tried to put force on one knee. He tried to get up again, but couldn't find the strength. Igris stood in front of the blonde and stopped his attacks. The knight looked down at the man. The crimson figure ignored the eyes staring in confusion and stretched out a hand towards the sword in the distance. The knight's sword flew through the air straight into his hand. Naruto realized what Igris was going to do and a question appeared in his head. "Do you want to execute me?" He certainly deserved his title of captain of the knights. When Naruto particularly made no move to resist, Igris raised his sword to decapitate the hunter. The sword fell in a straight line towards the man's neck. However, Uzumaki had no intention of giving up so easily. The shinobi's left hand shot out and blocked the falling blade. An unexpected clashing sound was made. The glove he had won before coming here had protected his hand, he felt an opening in Igris. Without missing the opportunity, Naruto threw his right fist at the knight. As expected, Igris did not show any indication that he was going to dodge. "No, you're more of those who are going to fight back, right? Think fast." The monster's calculation was the exchange of blow for blow. However, there was something that was not included in his calculation. In an infinitesimal moment, the fist that was flying towards the Igris's face was holding the summoned dagger. Naruto stabbed the dagger into the knight's eyes. An inhuman scream came from his helmet. At the same time, the blonde's dagger-affected eyes shone with a powerful light. He stood up. Now what? The battle wasn't over just because he took an eye. He needed something more powerful. A memory crossed Uzumaki's mind. That attack that almost killed him in the past, let's use it again on Igris. His body moved before his mind could give the order. He lowered his body and hugged Igris's waist. He started running. As he writhed in pain, Igris repeatedly struck his enemy's back. The man gritted his teeth and did not move away from the knight. Instead, he increased his speed. Sprint. Your movement speed is increased by 40%. The ninja's legs were moving faster. He reached a speed where his entire body shook. He would hit him against the wall with this speed. Naruto did not relieve the force holding the knight's waist and ran with all his strength towards the wall. Of course, he knew that the damage to his own body would not be minimal at this speed, but he had a passive skill like a trump card. It was almost there. The wall was right ahead. With a scream, Igris hit the wall. At the same time, a system message appeared. His health has dropped below 30%. Unyielding spirit has been activated. All damage you take is reduced by 50%. The impact of the attack was powerful enough to shake the entire room. Naruto took a step back. Even stuck to the wall, Igris was still alive. Uzumaki felt the burning life force emanating from the knight. I had to finish him. He removed Rasaka's poison fang from where he got stuck. Igris's body shrank as he took the dagger. The blonde grabbed the dagger and coldly brought it to the knight's neck. The attack did not pierce. One more time. Vital stab sparks flew from the tip of the dagger. A small scratch appeared on the armor. Again. Metallic sound. Again. Metallic sound. Again. And finally. Vital stab. Arasaka's poison fang stabbed deeply into the knight's neck. You have defeated Knight Captain, Blood Red Igris. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. Naruto raised his arms in the air. As he walked backwards, he lost strength in his legs and fell to the ground. He was panting as if he were about to vomit. This was a barely won victory. It was a very close fight. So is that it? Did I finish the mission? After trying to gather his breathing for some time, he finally stood up with difficulty. The job change mission was expected to end after defeating Igris, but no message appeared. Looking around, nothing had really changed. Well, there was one thing. There were several rays of light coming from Igris's body. That was the article's calling card. Let's grab the first ones. He wasn't sure what was going to happen next. But he thought he should grab what he could for now. Naruto stretched out a hand towards the light. You have found Red Knight Helmet. Do you want to purchase it? You have found Rune Stone. Hands of the Sovereign. Do you want to purchase it? You have found Leather Bag. Do you want to purchase it? You have found Instant Return Stone. Do you want to purchase it? Why were there so many? For the blonde that was suspicious, but he couldn't hide his happiness. Acquire everything. The leather bag was the first to be obtained. You have opened the leather bag. There is 1,500,000 gold inside. You have acquired 1,500,000 gold. Naruto was surprised. The reward is in a different class. As expected, the difficulty of the boss resulted in a great reward. Even the leather bag, which he didn't have much expectations about, gave him an insane amount of gold. This would be very useful for the store. However, Uzumaki was more interested in the other items. If only the leather bag gave him all that, what would happen to the helmet and the rune stone? He opened the helmet's information screen with a racing heart. Red Knight Helmet. Rarity. S. Type. Armor. Physical damage reduction plus 15%. Strength increased 20. Constitution increased 20. S rank. He let out a scream. This was the first S rank equipment he had encountered. In addition to the incredible advantage of reducing physical damage received by 15%, it also had a powerful effect of giving strength and constitution by 20 points. Uzumaki's chest was pounding with excitement for the team. He had obtained 2 rank A items so far. The first was the poison gland of Arasaka. The second was the Guardian's necklace obtained from Cerberus. Even the two were teams with great advantages. While the gland venom technically had no penalty to strength, it still provided a permanent 20% physical damage reduction boost. And the Guardian's necklace. It was a surprising item that gave 20 points to both agility and sense. The benefit of these two statistics only became more evident as time went on. And the Red Knight helmet he obtained had effects that almost combined those two A rank equipment. And without any type of sanctions. The young man couldn't help but smile despite the difficult fight. There was another thing, he actually liked the design of the helmet. This would be embarrassing to use. The helmet glowed the color of blood. Coupled with a long plumage, it was almost like a work of art. For a brief moment, Naruto would have liked to obtain and wear the full set of crimson armor. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate the other pieces of Igris's armor did not appear in item form. And if they did, they would have been obtained with the helmet. Naruto put aside his small regret and carefully put it on the helmet. As always, the item disappeared the moment he equipped it. Although he could not show the shape of him, the helmet greatly increased his attributes. State, strength. 128, 20. Constitution. 87, 20. Agility. 107. Intelligence. 66. Sense. 89. Available status points. 0. Physical damage reduction. 46%, plus 15%. Helmet magnification was temporarily displayed in parentheses. Strength, constitution, and even physical damage reduction had increased considerably. The blonde was immensely satisfied. Confirming the effects with his eyes made his heart race. Uzumaki shook his head. The mission is not over. He needed to calm down. There was one more item he had to check. Still hurried, he looked over at the 2 remaining items. Rune Stone. Hands of the Sovereign. Instant Return Stone. 2 stones. He saw the Instant Return Stone first. It was a piece of rock a little larger than a walnut. What was an Instant Return Stone? His curiosity was quickly answered. The stone information appeared in front of him. Instant Return Stone. Rarity. Type. Consumable. Object of the Break Class Advancement mission to immediately return to the outside of the dungeon. This item will disappear once the mission completes. The user cannot keep this item in his inventory. The way to use it was the same as a rune stone. Instead of a skill, breaking it would take him outside. Wait, so the job change mission hasn't ended? According to the item description, if the mission had ended it should have been destroyed. That meant a shiver ran down Naruto's spine. It was a strange feeling. He was given a way out of the dungeon in case of an emergency, so why did he feel so uncomfortable? If this was something that could be used in a normal dungeon, the value of the stone would be incalculable. A small rock was equivalent to a life-saving device. Who would be stingy with his money on something like that? Of course, he felt the same. This should have decreased the danger in the search greatly. If I wanted, I can leave this place whenever I want, the shinobi thinks. Despite all this, he couldn't help the fear he felt. As if expected, the system warned him with a tone. The player has obtained the instant return stone. Mission job change is going to start now. Chapter 25. The player has obtained the instant return stone. Mission job change is going to start now. Ah, so this was the item that would start the search. The ninja was surprised. He felt as if he had stepped on a landmine that could have been avoided. If he had known this, he would have rested before lifting her. It was too late to regret it now. No matter how much he combined his experience and intelligence, it was impossible to predict the future with 100% certainty. A cold sweat gathered on his eyebrows. He checked the status of him. HP. 4161, 10,270. MP. 398 Fatigue. 61. Fatigue is a little high, but it is still manageable. Thanks to the increase in the hull's constitution, both his current health and maximum health rose proportionally. Thank God for that. Naruto tried to cheer up a little. Ultimately, his life would not be in danger. He had the instant return stone in his hand. But no matter what he thought about it, the stone represented turning back on the mission. Otherwise, he would not have been given as an exit sign. It would be no different than giving up on getting a class. The sweat he gathered now fell in streaks down his face. Gulpay system message appeared. In 10 seconds, dimensional portals will begin to open randomly. Dimensional portals. Before he could figure out what those words meant, the system produced a huge screen with numbers in the air. 0 o'clock and 10 seconds. Well, that was pretty easy to understand. It was probably the countdown he talked about earlier. The messages continued. The player has two options. Use the instant return stone to escape from the dungeon. 8, 7, 6. The countdown continues. Or endure this final test as long as possible and obtain the required advancement points for the job change. Put up with. Hold what? He spoke out loud in frustration. He already had Risaka's poison fang summoned from the inventory in his hand. The rune stone he placed in the inventory and the immediate return stone that he could not place in the inventory he placed in his back pocket. While his heart felt like it was about to explode, he had finished his combat preparations. This was Uzumaki Naruto. The job change mission will begin soon. 4, 3, 2. The ninja stared at the countdown numbers, then surveyed his surroundings. His gaze fell quickly here and there. Something was about to begin. The air in the room began to spin and distort. 0 o'clock and 1 second. I wish you luck. It was the first time the system had shown an ounce of emotion, but there was no time to be surprised. The moment the timer reached 0, portals began to appear in various places around the room. It wasn't just 1 or 2. There were 6 near him, behind them many more appeared. At the same time, the timer began to count up. 0 o'clock and 2 seconds. The countdown had started again. This time, it was time for her trial. The advancement points would depend on it. The system wasn't completely clear, but Naruto managed to understand enough. I'm going to be stronger the more I endure it. More precisely, a more powerful class would be obtained. He couldn't miss an opportunity like this. There was room to breathe with his HP and MP. I'm going to endure it as long as I can. 0 o'clock and 3 seconds. The exact moment the timer reached 3 seconds, the nearest portals began to spawn a crowd of unarmed knights. The ground shook as the armored knights entered the formation. They looked like a wave of silver frozen in time, waiting to crash over him. Even in the face of the oppressive force, a smile appeared on Uzumaki's face. In a way, he was grateful that it was that level of enemies. If something like Igris came out of those portals, he couldn't imagine lasting more than seconds. Stealth. He used the little mana he had accumulated to enter stealth mode. It's a lot, but he was going to use it to check the situation first. The shinobi disappeared from sight. As expected, the knights who were rushing towards him slowed down and stopped. Unfortunately, something happened that the blonde did not expect. A magician used Eye of Detection. The system beeped with a warning. He turned his head toward the sound. A wizard who had appeared from one of the portals was casting a spell. The man saw an eye-shaped mark above his head. The mark glowed, and suddenly stealth mode was released. A curse crosses the ninja's head. Shit, his plans went downhill from the beginning. The knights who remained motionless after he disappeared turned their heads in unison towards the blonde. It was a scene straight out of a horror movie. The silver wave fell on the man. He gritted his teeth and prepared himself. His blow blew off a knight's head. His victim fell instantly. You have defeated knight. The light came out of his blue eyes. Thirst for blood. Bloodlust has been activated. You have inflicted fear. Targets will lose 50% of all attributes for 1 minute. He was able to slow down many of the monsters with a fear effect, but his mana had dropped too low. The mana cost of Bloodlust was 100. He wouldn't be able to use it again. The minute the monster's attributes were reduced, Naruto relentlessly destroyed as many enemies as possible. By the terrifying face of the shinobi, the knights were in fear. However, the speed at which the new knights appeared exceeded the blonde's ability to destroy them. In the midst of the frantic hand-to-hand combat, he checked the time. 0:03 and 19 seconds. 3 minutes and 19 seconds. Uzumaki wondered how many points that time would translate into. What was he going to get if he stopped now? The situation was becoming more and more unbearable by the second. The attack of the knights continued from the portals. He had destroyed many of them, but their number remained uncountable. Eventually, Naruto was buried in the mass of the knights. Unyielding spirit has been activated. He began to feel his health getting stronger. HP. 1036 10,270. And the weather? He questions himself. 0:05 and 8 seconds. 5 minutes and 8 seconds. He had endured as long as he could. At the bottom of the suffocating pile of knights, Uzumaki reached into his back pocket with effort, but the instant return stone slipped from his hands. The stone was thrown out by a knight's heel and rolled away. No, Naruto futilely reached out for his lifespan, but was unable to catch him through the knights. More knights stacked one on top of him. It was getting harder to breathe. Unyielding spirit has been activated. Unyielding spirit has been activated. He felt his consciousness fading. Through the chaos of the knights piling on him, he heard laughter coming from somewhere. "Weren't you the one who decided all this for yourself?" questions the voice. "Why go down such a dangerous path if you could choose a safe path? I think this is all you're worth." "Shut up," he barely murmurs. "You are the reason you are going to die here." The knights that had amassed on the blonde burst back. Even on the brink of death, the shinobi's eyes were still alive. They were full of determination. He wasn't going to let it end this way. "How long do you think this opportunity will last?" No, it wouldn't end here. He knew what it was like to be at the absolute bottom of the world, and that's why he wanted to stay at the absolute top. More than anyone, he knew the pain of being weak. He had done cowardly things to survive, and he felt ridiculous doing it. The staircase to the top that he could only dream of until now had finally appeared before him. Did they expect him to just watch and do nothing? There was no way. He remembered that voice in his head. It was his voice of his. He will fight until the end. It didn't matter if his health was 10 or 1. He was going to fight until the end. Until my bones are dust and my muscles are torn. For his family. Naruto threw his body against the knights. His fist flew towards them. A knight's breastplate collapsed and his wearer was sent flying. Like a bowling ball, the flying body knocked down the other knights in its path. Relentlessly, the knights addressed him once more. Naruto's effort became more difficult. Cuffs. Elbows. Knees. Feet. He threw every part of his body at his enemies. Every time he attacked, a knight would break like a paper doll. Their fatigue is more than 70. Your movements will be restricted. As the Noda said, his body began to slow down. But the light in his blue eyes did not fade. Over time, the knights continued even after 1 or 2 hits. Still, if they weren't taken down with 1 hit, he should hit twice. If they were not struck down in 2 strikes, he would have to strike 3 times. 4 times. 5 times. 8, 7, 6, 5. Meanwhile, a countdown of sorts was happening. Naruto was focusing on the battle he hadn't noticed before. Is the mission already over? He questions himself once again. His brief moment of hope quickly faded. 0:06 and 27 seconds. The search timer kept ticking up. What was happening before him was not related to the timer. 4, 3, 2. Naruto believed in the system. She remembered the first time she talked to him. How he threatened to stop his heart in 0.02 seconds if he didn't agree to become a player. Well. His eyes widened. "I'm going to use you until the last second." 2 other knights were crushed. However, compared to his fighting spirit, the blonde's body was unrecognizable. The strength behind his shoulders was gone. The decelerated fists could no longer block the knight's attacks. 1 attack from the front and 1 from the back. Crushed between the 2 horses, Naruto let out a painful moan. Without leaving an opening, the knights were getting closer and closer. Cornered by the crowd, he could no longer lift a finger. Still, more and more knights were heading towards the shinobi. The silver wave became a silver mountain. Uzumaki blew what he imagined to be his last breath. So this was the end. Somehow, the shinobi found a small opening and stretched his hand towards the sky. It was a meaningless gesture at the time. HP. 93 10,270. The situation was desperate. But she didn't give up. The hand he raised to the sky closed into a fist. At that moment, the unknown countdown ended. 1.0. Chapter 26. You have not been able to complete the daily mission. You will be moved to the penalty zone for a certain time. He remembered. He didn't do the daily mission today. He had purposely jumped over it to enter the area in order to test his progress against the centipedes and see if he could continue the raid on the demonic castle. And to think that he would come out at a time like this. As in the hospital, the area began to shake vigorously. One by one, even the knights he was fighting turned in the arena. The world around him was changing. He laughed silently. The words of the system before the mission will begin kept appearing in his head. I wish you luck. Was it because the mission was too difficult? Or did he mean having the luck to obtain more advancement points? Luck, coincidence, call it what you want. It was just another opportunity for him. The important thing was how he was going to use this opportunity. The tremors grew stronger. Instead of struggling to keep his balance like in the past, Naruto surrendered to the earthquake and closed his eyes. And just like before, he felt a sense of weightlessness and all sounds disappeared. When he opened his eyes, he was in the middle of a familiar desert. He collapsed on the sand. He grabbed the sand with his hands and released a torrent of gasps. His lungs filled with a refreshing breath of air, spreading the sensation throughout his body. Finally, I feel alive. But the feeling of security surrounding his mind, Uzumaki lay on the ground. He looked up at the empty black sky. The vision of an endless pitch-black ceiling filled his sight. It was the penalty zone, he remembered. Oh wait, now is not the time to be lying down, he thinks amusingly. Because he had just escaped from a very dangerous place, he forgot that this place was not exactly a rest area. Still, he didn't want to start acting, so he called up a status screen while he was lying down. HP. 104 tenths, 270 MP. 202 850 Fatigue. 91. He wondered why it was so difficult to move. He knew why. Fatigue had increased by 90. The blonde didn't feel like lifting a finger right now. His health was one thing, but for the moment, it was important to regain his vigor. Store. The words buy and sell appeared in the air. No matter how he looked at it, the system had clearly created the store with a minimum of effort, but today, it was an incredibly welcoming sight. Naruto bought the most expensive of the healing potions. At the time he confirmed the transaction. A glass bottle with a red liquid appeared in his outstretched hand. Due to his condition, the effort was still great to even uncork the bottle. He poured the potion into his mouth. The red liquid ran down his throat. You regained your stamina. You regained your stamina. You regained your stamina. Since it was the highest level of healing potion, just one bottle was enough to completely undo the fatigue from him. Strangely, his health did not recover. HP. 106 tenths, 270 MP. 204 850 Fatigue. 0. Even when he emptied the bottle, his health remained the same. It was very different from the fatigue that was now 0. Because by the time the last drop of the potion fell into his mouth, he was able to figure out why. His health is below 10%. He cannot restore his health with a potion. The reason was simple. It was because his health was too low. Now that he thought about it, even medical ninjutsu had its limits. This was not an unknown phenomenon. Like healers, he couldn't heal someone beyond a certain point based on his ability. It seemed like potions had similar limits. Are you telling me that the limit is 10% of my remaining life? This was good to know. For, had he put his faith in the potion at the wrong time, he would have made a serious mistake. This is why having experience was important. Wasn't there a saying for that? What does not kill you makes you stronger. That was all because of the power of experience. Even at this moment, thanks to his luck, he had the experience of finding himself in the penalty zone. It's time. And indeed it was. He felt a form of life approaching from beneath the sand. Uzumaki raised his legs and shot up from the ground. His body felt as light as a feather. Thanks to the potion, his strength had completely returned. The blonde landed a few steps away and turned around. As expected, the place where he was lying before was now sinking. I remember that in the past I thought that he would slip on me and fall to the ground. Now, he could look at the top with a carefree attitude. And it was at the bottom before, and a column of sand shot up from the ground, revealing the shape of the giant centipede. Everything was just as he remembered it. Man, that thing looked a lot scarier back then. Now, they seemed to move in slow motion before Naruto's eyes. He looked up and confirmed the red letters above the centipede's head. Giant sand centipede with poison fangs. The red name, just like the Cerberus of the demon castle. The mission message appeared. Penalty mission. Survive. Goal. Survive for the given time. Time required. 4 hours. Remaining time. 4 hours 0 min 0 sec. After reading the message, the shinobi clenched his fists. He could buy some time with this. Since he didn't use the instant return stone, it's likely that he still had a chance. I'll probably go back there again after the penalty mission. What if the 4 hours you spent here is added to the class advancement mission timer? The advancement points he would gain would be massive. Well, he still didn't know how the timer worked. When he thought about how the system worked until now, this could turn out to be an incredible stroke of luck. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. After almost 4 hours, Naruto had gained 4 levels after taking down countless centipedes. He had reached level 51. The penalty mission was almost over. Penalty mission. Survive. Goal. Survive for the given time. Time required. 4 hours. Remaining time. 0 hours 3 min 19 sec. It was time for him to return. The blonde took a look at the centipede corpses that covered the area. Thanks to his sacrifice, he was able to regain his health. It's a shame they don't drop any items or gold. Well, it wouldn't have made sense for a place of punishment to reward him so much. Now, it was time to prepare for his return. Store. Current gold. 3,115,629. Excluding the various money bags from the humanoid monsters, he had earned a total of 1,500,000 gold from Igris alone. He had plenty of funds now. With this in mind, he looked inside the store for a new weapon. A suitable weapon caught his attention. Night Killer. Rarity. B. Type. Dagger. Attack power 75. Slay Knights. Plus 25% damage against heavily armored opponents. It is a sharp and durable dagger designed to cut through a knight's armor. Due to its serrated blades, it does not slide easily against armor. It was a weapon intended to be used to kill heavily armored targets. The cost was 2,800,000 gold. He would have to spend most of his gold, but this was not the time to be stingy. I can't take my gold with me to the afterlife without hesitation. He bought the weapon. Furthermore, he also bought some wrappers. You have purchased Night Killer. You have purchased wrappers. As the description of it noted, it was a fearsome looking dagger with a saw blade. He took the weapon with his right hand and using the force wrappings attached it to his hand. He moved the blade around. It felt natural in his hand, as if it were a part of his body. At least, I'm not going to let him fall like this. He briefly considered wrapping Risaka's poison fang around his left hand, but decided against it. It would be too inconvenient to lose both of his hands. He would keep use of his left hand just in case. He placed the leftover wrappings in the inventory and then noticed the rune stone that he had received from Igris. Ah well, I forgot about this. Rune stone. Hands of the Sovereign. Breaking the stone will allow you to absorb the skill. He needed every advantage right now, whether it was an item or a skill. Naruto broke the rune stone without thinking. You have learned Hands of the Sovereign LVL. 1. Hands of the Sovereign LVL. 1. Active skill. Mana cost. 0. Exercise your will over an object without physically touching it. After reading the description, he remembered a scene from before. It was when Igris reached out for his sword and it flew into his hand from a distance. So he used this ability to move the sword. An ability to move an object from a distance with just your mind on top of that. He didn't have a mana cost. If I can really move something, that's an incredible skill, he thinks excitedly. A shinobi tried to quickly move the centipede's body next to him. Your command of it is insufficient to move the object. Your command of it is insufficient to move the object. It seemed like moving something heavy takes more practice. How about this? He dropped Risaka's poison fang to the ground, then stretched out a hand toward her. The dagger returned easily to his hand. Oh, he purred, looking at the dagger in amazement. Very well, this is useful enough. And with that, all the preparations had been completed. Naruto raised his head and saw that time was almost up. Remaining time. 0 hours 0 min 4 sec. When the 4 seconds became 3, the system sent him a message. The penalty mission will end soon. And he was followed by another. Because you have hunted in the penalty zone, the next penalty mission will be adjusted to your difficulty. The difficulty setting. It would become more difficult to hunt so the penalty will feel like a penalty. Well, should there be a next time? The blonde swallowed. Now, the job change mission will resume. Hundreds of monsters would probably be waiting for him back in the boss room. Maybe even more. Although he thought it would be like returning to the room, it was more like he was being thrown away. Health, mana, fatigue, equipment and skill. Even his mind had improved in the last 4 hours. Still, he felt nervous. His heartbeat was almost painful. He closed his eyes to calm himself. Then, he rang the electronic tone. The penalty mission will end now. This was his last chance. When Uzumaki opened his eyes, he saw the mass of silver knights beginning to turn towards him. They were not his target. Blue eyes moved from side to side, searching for his target. First of all, the magicians. The reason why he was addressing the mages first was simple. If his theory is correct, it was to confirm the theory that he had thought in the penalty zone. The knights charged towards him strongly. Naruto calmly used the knight at the head of the group as a springboard and jumped off of his shoulders. He bypassed the enemy army once in the air. Where are the magicians? I found one. In the distance, he saw a lone mage. He was right, what she saw earlier was correct. In the area, he had considered that he was wrong, but now he was sure. It was during the time that he was being suffocated by the massive knights, he was only able to hold one hand towards the sky. At that moment, through the small gaps of the soldiers in front of him, he saw something that didn't make any logical sense. He was a solitary wizard who continually cast spells. If he were just a wizard preparing a spell, it wouldn't have been anything out of the ordinary. But in that brief moment, Naruto felt something off. Wasn't there a single spell coming towards him? The attack against him was made only by the knights. The wizards continued to cast spells, but their finished spells showed no effect on him. Well, except for the time they used a detection technique to break his stealth mode. And during that time, the knights around him stopped for a moment. At first, he had thought it was because they had missed their goal. But while he was hunting the centipedes in the penalty zone, he realized something very important. Was it after the 8th centipede? When he defeated the monster, a level up message appeared. And the level increase was followed by a complete recovery of his health status. In that moment of joy, a thought had occurred to him. Wait, I just leveled up easily, why couldn't I gain a single level there? The system had warned him that the level up status would not recover from him, but it did warn him that he would not level up at all. In fact, he leveled 5 times before reaching the boss room. However, during the class advancement mission, he did not gain a single level. In the 6 minutes he had to endure, he had destroyed almost 100 knights. The wizards who didn't use his spells on him. Knights who do not give any experience points. He hadn't thought much about these two facts and put them in the back of his mind. But after some time, the two facts combined into a theory in the blonde's head. Every single knight in that area were all fake. What if the reason why all the knights stopped when the wizard used Eye of Detection was not because Uzumaki had disappeared, but because the wizard had stopped his other spell? Yes, he was right. Now it was time to confirm his theory. He ignored the outstretched hands that were trying to grab him and used the knights' heads and shoulders as a path toward the mage. He felt that the magician realized it and panicked. His spellcasting sped up. The knights who had previously concentrated on him like a swarm suddenly changed the pattern and formed a protective wall around the mage. Naruto practically received confirmation of his theory with that. The shinobi landed in front of the wizard. Without a hint of hesitation, he stabbed the wizard's chest with a dagger in his right hand. Without a sound, the wizard disappeared in a cloud of black smoke. You have defeated a wizard. And at the same time the hundreds and so many knights who were attacking the blonde all fell, literally, as if they were puppets with their strings cut. The fallen knights were just empty armor without an owner. It was true, he internally shouted in victory. After avoiding crossing the line between life and death, he had finally come to the answer. The knights were nothing. It was the magicians who controlled the knights. Killing them was the goal. And to think that the night killer's first victim would be a wizard. The young man looked at the ownerless robe on the ground with a smile. He had gotten a lot of room to breathe now. However, he would not be careless. The mission was not over. The ground shook. Naruto turned around. The other knights had already surrounded him. There should be no more wizards controlling them around them. The knights were addressing him. The ninja's right arm became a blur. The wave of knights before him were all cut cleanly in a straight line. Even though he was the one who did it, he was surprised. The investment of 2.8 million gold had been very good. The Night Slayer's blade cut through the knight's armor like they were paper. It wasn't just a jagged edge. As its name indicated, it was a powerful weapon against knights. Are the weapons in the store that good? He wonders in his head. This was a little different from the standard combat logic he was familiar with. In normal combat, the weapons in the store were only kunes or shurikens, which were used when a good one could not be found on an enemy's corpse. If they are like that, I really can't underestimate the gold. At the very least, it was much better than the shinobi weapons of the real world. At the same time, Naruto thought about how much money he could make if he sold the store's items in the real world. Unlike consumables, shop equipment did not have an interchangeable restriction. Oh shit, focus, he punishes himself mentally. This was not the time to be distracted. The knights continued and charged at him. The blonde dodged here, there and continued to defeat the knights. However, he wasn't going to finish if he continued this way. The moment he focused in one direction and took down a series of knights, a larger group would appear from a different direction and charge at him. Another knight lost his head. He had to find the magicians. Naruto used the headless knight's fall as a platform. Using his shoulders, he jumped into the air again. Stealth, his figure began to disappear. Of course, this was not to hide. What he wanted was. A mage has used Eye of Detection. A mage has used Eye of Detection. A mage has used Eye of Detection. The system's warning alarms pierced his ears. Naruto continued jumping from knight to knight and memorized the location of the eye-shaped markings. There are 5 magicians. He headed to the nearest one first. As the blonde headed towards him, the wizard panicked and gathered his knights in front of him, but it was too late. Risaka's poison fang flew from the left hand and struck the wizard's forehead. You have learned dagger throw LVL. 1. You have defeated a wizard. Once again, 100 knights fell lifeless to the ground. 4 left. Naruto used the heads and shoulders of the army to maneuver him. As he moved, he took a quick look at Risaka's poison fang that he had not summoned again. He decided to test his new ability. Hands of the Sovereign. Uzumaki reached out a hand towards the dagger on the ground. Like a magnet, the dagger shot through the air toward his hand. Yeah, he grabbed the dagger. He would no longer have to inefficiently summon the dagger to his hand now. Meanwhile, he had arrived in front of the next wizard. Before the wizard could try anything, Naruto swung the dagger diagonally across his body. You have defeated a wizard. More knights fell. Now there were less than half of them. Insurance of victory, Naruto opened his eyes in anticipation. 3 more. As if sensing danger, the remaining mages gathered at the same place. And in front of them was his army of knights. When all the knights gathered in one place, the wizards cast another spell. Their strange voices echoed throughout the room, and their magic was completed. The mass of knights guarding the mages began to collapse in on themselves, as if they were put in a hydraulic press. Soon, a giant metal golem formed from their bodies and looked at the blonde. Damn, that's great, echoes his voice in your head. He paused briefly from the powerful pressure he gave off, and Naruto praised the magic. But there was nothing to fear. After the numerous times he had faced death, he was filled with anticipation rather than nervousness. The golem's footsteps shook the ground. It seemed very dangerous. The man lowered his body to avoid the swing of his gigantic fist. The pillar behind the ninja was lightly grazed by the fist, but the destructive power of the attack resulted in the structure being obliterated. Uzumaki smiled widely. If he hadn't realized the truth, he would have panicked at the thought of taking this thing down, but there were no such worries. The golem stretched out his hands and was about to smash them on the ground. Instead of running backwards, Naruto used sprint and charged forward. In the blink of an eye, the blonde passed between the golem's legs. While the giant monster lost its balance, the shinobi appeared in front of the 3 wizards. The wizards' shoulders rose in surprise. They say there is no strength like those who unite. Not this time. Both daggers in Naruto's hands glowed. You have defeated a wizard. You have defeated a wizard. You have defeated a wizard. The 3 wizards disappeared in unison in a cloud of black smoke. The golem that finally turned around upon realizing the enemy's absence from him also collapsed. The armor of the knights that made up his body ended up scattered on the ground. However, Uzumaki was not relieved yet. Was over? Or will something else happen? He maintained his fighting stance when he heard the electronic sound of the system. Naruto gulped in anticipation. Contrary to his thoughts, the system had announced the end of the mission. You have defeated all the monsters in the testing room. The job change mission will end now. Your job will be decided now. Based on the advancement points earned, you can advance to a higher class. Finally. The shinobi breathed a sigh of relief. Phew, it was a difficult fight. If he stuck to the idea of the instant return stone until the end, he would not have discovered the secret of fighting. I've probably been focusing on just when to finish the mission, he thinks grimly. Through his bad luck, or perhaps his good luck, he lost the stone and was able to focus on the battle. The result was a great success. Now, it was time to reap the rewards. The blonde looked at the stopwatch. 4:29 and 16 seconds. Chapter 27. The timer stopped. He managed to last for hours, almost 4.5. Not only that, in a mission he just had to endure, but he actually ended up killing all the monsters and ended the mission by himself. Thinking about how many points he would earn and what he was going to do with those points, his heart began to race. The player's actions will be analyzed to determine an appropriate class. Good for me. If the system uses your actions so far to determine your class, there was little chance of receiving something that didn't fit your fighting style. It was good news. The presence of the god of death follows where the player goes. The path ahead is littered with corpses, and the smell of blood is still in its wake. Naruto felt like it was too much, but when he thought about it, he couldn't disagree. Well, everything was to level up. Every time I entered an instant dungeon, I killed the monsters that respawned until I could no longer level up. God of death, corpses, smell of blood. No matter how you analyze it. Just as he expected in the first place, it seemed that his class would be assassin, like his actual job of shinobi. The player craves great power, but without depending on any companion, he builds his path with his own strength. Naruto nodded just as he heard. She agreed with his system analysis. From the beginning, I have never had anyone to trust. Still, he wasn't sure why the system would go to this depth to analyze his personality when all he was doing was determining his class. The system continued. His desire for great power is strong enough to call upon the spirits that wander through the valley of death. Through the army of the dead who will follow his command, you will be able to build your own path without anyone's help. Army of the dead. That's when Naruto realized something was wrong. Wait, before he could protest, the system used its usual calm tone to broadcast the results. His class is Necromancer. What the hell was this? How did the message start so well by pointing out that the class would be assassin? How did he turn sharply towards Necromancer? Naruto blankly stared at the results with a stunned expression. He rubbed his eyes, but the words didn't change. His class is Necromancer. I didn't even touch the intelligence statistic because of all the summoner class shinobi, he had never heard of a necromancer, he didn't even know what necromancy was until minutes before. Leaving aside the sword that he briefly used at the beginning, he had exclusively used a dagger until now, and the skills he easily obtained belonged to the assassin class. He could not have imagined that a totally different category would appear. And to think that he was going to receive a magic class, not only that, but also that of necromancer. He only knew of the class through knowledge of scrolls and rumor of the Edo Tensei, created by the Nidaime Hokage, but he had a rough idea of what the necromancer class entailed. Attacky shinobi, followed by an army of undead. No matter how he thought about it, he didn't fit her. Naruto relaxed his face and shook his head. Even if his thoughts were in chaos, he was going to analyze the situation calmly. This calm was one of Naruto's weapons. Taking a moment, he was able to regain his composure. Still, how the hell? Denial, then anger. He felt like a patient who had received a terminal diagnosis, going through the 5 stages of grief. In this situation, there was not much room for acceptance. If he were to choose the benefits of the necromancer class as the system said, he guessed that he could make his own army out of it. The problem is that the army would be made up of recognized soldiers. Having this in the real world would be turning society upside down. Shinobi like the Sannin were already the object of envy and fear. Imagine if a shinobi carried an army of the dead around. Forget compatibility, he couldn't imagine taking on the burden. Would you like to accept the class? But the system asked for his response. Oh, thank God. He had a choice, the ninja sighed in relief. The fact that the class wasn't being forced on him meant he had another chance. And if he had another chance, he wouldn't hesitate. Naruto easily rejected the offer. No. Then the message asked again. Necromancer is a hidden class. Do you still want to reject? It was basically the same question, but he couldn't answer quickly after being asked twice. This time, he hesitated. Class hidden. It was certainly something that could be found in a story made by a madman, but in reality, they were not shinobi with rare abilities. Like a Kekkei Genkai, red and white eyes, the Sharingan and the Byakugan passed through the blonde's head. When it is said that a class is hidden, are we talking about those shinobi with powers in their genes? If that's the case, this could be a good opportunity. He imagined the system talking to him. I'm offering you the necromancer class because I know you want great power. In that sense, the necromancer was probably a powerful class. In fact, he remembered that most of the shinobi with special powers fell under a powerful clan. On the contrary, he would be a hunter with a special power under the combat class. Little by little, his heart began to race. If only I could try the necromancer class, I wouldn't be hesitating so much, but it was a hopeless thought. Things couldn't always go his way, and they had never heard of someone with such powers. In fact, he had never heard of summoners fighting by leading an army. When he came to that line of thought, Naruto looked around at the army of fallen knights around him. Those wizards in a way, the mages he fought during the class advancement mission, wielded powers similar to those of a necromancer. The knights were his army. Fighting against the knights who rushed against him, without any concern for his life, was annoying. If he couldn't solve the answer by fighting, or if the wizard's combat aptitudes weren't so low, Uzumaki raised his head. Understanding filled his eyes. His combat aptitude is not low. He was different from these magicians. What if the summoner leading an army also possessed great individual strength? It would really be a nightmare for his enemies. If it could be like this, the fleeting idea that was like a dream for him in the past. It might even be possible for him alone to clear an army of B rank and above. The blonde swallowed. If he could continue to increase his abilities after becoming a necromancer, naturally, the army under his command would also be stronger. The synergy of growth exceeded his imagination. It's not just about leveling up alone. His army would be stabilized with him. A shiver ran down his spine. Uzumaki looked from him to the floating message. The ninja raised his head. He calmly waited for his response. Necromancer is a hidden class. Do you still want to reject? Unlike before, he didn't pressure her. The young man looked into his thoughts. Is this what he wanted for me? Of course, the system did not respond. After much thinking, the blonde made a decision. If he was being given strong power, he would accept. He no longer hesitated. Would he like to accept the class? Yeah. As if waiting, the system immediately launched the following message. You have accepted the class. Based on the advancement points obtained, you can advance to a higher class. Points will be calculated now. Calculated. While the system calculated, Naruto unwrapped the wrapper around his right hand. He had clenched his fist so tightly that welts appeared on the palm of his hand. This will leave a blister. He clicked his tongue softly. He could be taken care of with a single drop of a healing potion, but the fact that he was not able to do so in this place was inconvenient. When the night killer returned to his inventory, the system beeped. Naruto raised his head in response. You have exceeded the waiting time limit. Extra points will be awarded. Extra points. Well, it made sense. He wasn't sure what the timeout limit was, but it lasted for a pretty long time. He laughed with satisfaction, but suddenly, numerous messages appeared before his eyes. You didn't use the instant return stone. Extra points will be awarded. Your current health is over 50%. Extra points will be awarded. You have defeated all enemies. Extra points will be awarded. Added advancement points have exceeded the required amount. As agreed, a special reward will be provided to you. That? He wonders in his head. The tone of the repetition was piercing to the ears, but the sound didn't even register in the blonde's mind. His gaze locked on two specific words. Special reward, and a special one. The ninja's hands that were placing the night killer into the inventory froze, his eyes staring at the message box. He couldn't look away. The message continued. You have advanced from Necromancer to Shadow Monarch. You have learned the specific job skills. You have obtained 10 stat points. You have obtained the title, He Who Has Triumphed Over Adversity. Monarch of Shadows. He was an unknown name, so he quickly opened his status screen. Name: Uzumaki Naruto. Level: 51. Job: Shadow Monarch. His new class was placed in the appropriate place. The system did not tell him that, depending on the advancement points, it was possible to advance to a higher class. And right now, he told her that his promotion points exceeded the required amount, and the resulting class was Shadow Monarch. So this is the special reward that the system talked about. He could not put into words what he then witnessed. Something strange was happening before his eyes, behind the floating message. A strange black smoke rose from the corpses of the knights lying before him. He wasn't there before when he did the class advancement mission. A moment ago, they were mere pieces of metal without a controller. And now Naruto closed the status screen and looked around him. He wasn't just one or two of them. Each and every fallen knight was emitting black smoke. It is a possible target for shadow extraction. It is a possible target for shadow extraction. It is a possible target for shadow extraction. Every time he looked at a corpse with black smoke, a message appeared, telling him that extraction was possible. He had no idea what this meant. The black smoke almost looked like it was writhing in pain. It felt like they were reaching out to him, asking him to rescue them. Would it be weird to say that he could hear them screaming? But the blonde was sure. He would be able to save them from his pain. Shadow extraction. Please elect the command phrase for shadow extraction. Did I have to assign a phrase to the skill? After a brief moment, Uzumaki spoke out of instinct. Arises. And with that, with a heavy groan coming from somewhere, the shadows of the knights began to tremble as if they were alive. Naruto looked around at the fallen army. All his shadows moved. A black hand appeared from one of the shadows. She then placed herself on the ground and seemingly pulled herself out of the shadows. Shit blue eyes were open. He was human. More precisely, the soldiers had a human form covered from head to toe in pitch black armor. Soldiers began to appear one by one from the shadows. Is this a skill? Before he knew it, several dozen soldiers had appeared. You have succeeded in shadow extraction. A dozen soldiers standing around him. What was this? It is questioned. He approached the nearest soldier. First touch. He put a hand on them and felt metal. The armor wasn't just for show. In reality, they were soldiers dressed in pitch black armor, covered with weapons. They looked like a person. But they weren't human. He didn't feel any life force coming out of them. Not a sound of breathing or a hint of a heartbeat. Besides that, Naruto swallowed a scream. He had cast a glance through the helmet's visors. Inside there was darkness. He had the feeling that he was going to be swallowed by her. The shinobi slowly took a few steps back. Were all of them generated from the shadows? He quickly opened the skill screen from him. As the system had told him, there were new job-specific skills listed on him. Job-specific skills. Active skills. Shadow extraction. LVL. 1. Shadow storage LVL. 1. The first skill was recorded. Shadow extraction LVL. 1. Class-specific skill. Mana cost. 0. Create a shadow soldier from a corpse. Success rate depends on target skills and death time. Maximum shadows. 30/30. After reading the explanation of the skill, he was able to determine the identity of the black soldiers. Shadow soldier. He was a monster created from the shadow of a corpse. Naruto swallowed. If these guys were really his soldiers. The blonde stretched his hand to the right. All the soldiers turned to the right. He slowly moved it himself. The soldiers followed his hand and looked ahead. Uzumaki stood in the middle of his gaze. He calmed his heart and lowered his hand. All the soldiers knelt before him. Everyone moved according to his will. Ah! Naruto expressed his astonishment and the corners of his mouth lifted. This is great, he says with satisfaction. Oh, true, an idea crossed the blonde's head. He couldn't waste another second. He had just seen the power of his new ability. He could turn a downed monster into a dead soldier. If that was the case, there was a monster nearby that he should try it on. A shinobi climbed onto the pile of armor that made up the golem. He was able to see the entire room above. His eyes scanned the entire room and found his target. "I found it," he ran quickly toward the address. Even without sprint, he immediately arrived at the destination. Gulp. Naruto stared at the extraction target and gulped. The monster's corpse was exactly where he had left it, blood red-gray. Looking at the headless body half buried in the wall, Uzumaki remembered how strong his battle was. He stood in front of Igris. Just a few hours ago, he was an enemy that threatened his life. But now, the fallen knight was a first-class ingredient for his ability. Fortunately, like the other knights, there was black smoke coming from Igris's body. It is a possible target for shadow extraction. His face lit up. He remembered the command phrase. After a breath, Naruto quietly spoke the words. "Arises." That was the activation phrase he had chosen. But the skill did not activate. Uzumaki tilted his head in confusion and was about to try again when the system rang. "You have exceeded the maximum allowed number of shadows. To extract another shadow, use cancel extraction to send one or more shadow soldiers to the world of nothing. Shadow soldiers sent into the void cannot be summoned again." Correct. He remembered a part of the skill, maximum shadow. 30/30. The limit of shadow extraction was 30. That meant that the number of soldiers he made was exactly 30. The blonde turned around. The shadow soldiers had followed him and stood at attention. "When did they follow me?" As he was appropriate to their names, the shadow soldiers had moved without making a sound. Anyway, to extract Igris's shadow, he had to get rid of one of them. But even after meeting them just a few moments ago, he felt sad about getting rid of one of the soldiers from him. Did you gain familiarity in such a short time? With a sad look, the shinobi scanned each of the shadow soldiers. As he moved from one to the other, their names and levels appeared. Shadow Infantry LVL. 1. Normal grade. Shadow Infantry LVL. 1. Normal grade. They all had the same name and level. Well, the blonde guessed that the base was all the same. However, he did discover 3 soldiers who were not infantry. Those are. Unlike the armored infantry, the 3 of them wore clothes. Shadow Mage LVL. 1 veteran grade. He knew where these had come from. The 3 mages who controlled the Iron Golem had also risen under his command. 27 infantry and 3 magicians. He determined that the small number of mages would have to be maintained, so he selected the nearest infantry. "I'm sorry. Cancel, extraction. The soldier turned into smoke again and dispersed into nothingness. No trace of him could be found. Naruto took a moment of silence for him, then turned to Igris. That he was ready. He had sacrificed a valuable soldier to make room for Igris, this should be worth it. It is best to use it while the iron is hot. The blonde tried the skill. Arises. Compared to his previous attempt, the shadow beneath Igris began to tremble and move as if he were alive. It was the same phenomenon he saw with the extraction of the other soldiers. It was working. Naruto clenched his fists. He had a good feeling about this. Shadow extraction is being attempted. Extracting. What would Igris look like when he stood up again? Sweat gathered on the ninja's hands. However, with a sound of metal breaking, a message appeared. Shadow extraction failed. There are 2 attempts left. Ugh, he sighed in relief after seeing that he still had a chance. Now that I think about it, the skill description meant to tell him that the success rate depended on the target skills. Seeing that in action was quite surprising. The first failure to extract it. It was like being punched in the face. On top of that, there was a limit on the number of attempts. 2 attempts left. If he failed those 2 attempts, would Igris's shadow return to the void like the sacrificed soldier? Uzumaki shuddered at the worst. He shook his head. "Let's not be pessimistic," he encouraged. "Be optimistic." If he believed, maybe the universe would help. Feeling a mix of fear and anticipation, Naruto tried the second attempt. Arises. His expectations of him were high. Shadow extraction failed. 1 attempt remaining. Igris was a pain in the ass while he was alive, and he was equally annoying when he died. He thought of the worst case scenario again. After the second failure, the result looked bleak. The blonde took a deep breath. There was only one more chance. The last opportunity. Naruto closed his eyes and organized his thoughts. He considered that perhaps the desire to possess Igris's shadow was not enough. Naruto slowly opened his eyes. The black smoke coming from Igris seemed like it was extending a hand towards him, asking him to rescue the knight. The shinobi's eyes focused. As if he were to take the hand in a rescue, Uzumaki also extended his right hand. Arises. Something happened that he didn't expect. He didn't realize it happened either. But at that moment, the word he said echoed and he vibrated with power. And following his order, a deep scream echoed from somewhere and a cold wind followed. Uzumaki's face lit up. He remembered this phenomenon. It was the same as when the soldiers stood up. As expected, when the scream ended, a hand rose from Igris's shadow. The moment the hand was placed on the ground, a message appeared. "You have succeeded in shadow extraction." "Yadadabayo," he shouted in celebration. He clenched his fists. Because he had failed twice, success was even sweeter. The good news did not stop there. The voice of the monarch managed to raise the fighting spirit of the fallen man. You have succeeded in strengthening the shadow. Shadow level will start at 7. Strengthening? He questions himself. Does this mean they don't necessarily start at level 1? Naruto's blue eyes were open. As the message appeared, the pitch-black knight who rose from the shadow was level 7. The shinobi gasped. Igris's form was exactly as he remembered it. The plumage that decorated his helmet. The lithe-looking body covered from head to toe in armor. He even keeps the classy cape that he had taken off before the fight. The only difference was that instead of blood red, he was completely black all over. Other than that, he was the same boss that he had defeated before. You could almost say that Igris had come back to life. However, compared to before, there was not even a hint of hostility coming from the Igris reborn. He stood at attention, waiting for an order. As for Igris, Naruto's heart beat vigorously. A smile adorned his face. At the same time, a question appeared in his mind. He looked over the knight's head. Why doesn't it have a name? LVL. 7. Rank. Knight. Curiously, question marks appeared where his name should be. The degree is different too. He had expected him to be stronger because of his level, but there was a bit more of a difference between him and the other soldiers. As if he read his mind, a system screen appeared in front of him. It is possible to assign a name to knight-grade soldiers. The name given will remain until the soldier is released. Carefully choose a name for the soldier. Name? He wasn't sure at first, but then he realized that the soldier had his own name. It wouldn't be a problem if he called him by that name. Choose a name for the soldier. As if he was asking her to hurry up, the message was flashing rapidly. Naruto opened his mouth. Igris blood red. Wait. If he was assigned a name, he would have to constantly call him by that name. That means that, if he gave her the name he was thinking of, he would always have to end up with something blood red. He shuddered at how pathetic he sounded. How about and so, Naruto decided to shorten the name a little. Igris. Would you like to assign Igris to him? Yeah. The moment he confirmed it, the question marks in the knight's name disappeared and were replaced with Igris. Igris LVL. 7. Rank. Knight. Even though it was the knight's original name, seeing his name officially decorating the information box gave Naruto a sense of pride. It was as if the idea that the boss was now his soldier had solidified. My soldier Uzumaki turned around. The 29 shadow soldiers were waiting for his command. At this time, his army's numbers were small. Only 30 soldiers. It could have been because the level of shadow extraction was too low, or because his intelligence attribute was too low. Even so, the blonde was sure that the number of his army would only increase in the future. I really got an army, he murmured dumbfounded. And contrary to what he had previously feared, an army composed of shadows, not bones and corpses. Only one problem remained. How was he going to walk with these soldiers? He got a headache imagining walking down the road with the pitch-black shadows following him. Whether skeletons or shadows. It would surely be noticed if these things were around him. Not only that, this ability went beyond revival. If he were placed under special surveillance, people could even ask him to cancel the summons. The cages, Danzo, Orochimaru, he murmurs uncomfortably. He imagined the council swarming and felt suffocated by the headache that followed. Not to mention Orochimaru, he felt a chill all over his body. Fortunately, he had another ability. Naruto opened the screen of his ability. Class-specific skills. Active skills. Shadow extraction. LVL. 1. Shadow storage LVL. 1. The only thing he hadn't checked yet. Shadow storage. It seemed like something that would be used in situations like this. Shadow storage LVL. 1. Class-specific ability. Mana cost. 0. Absorb the shadow soldiers into the user's shadow for storage. Stored soldiers can be freely summoned and reabsorbed by the user. Stored shadows. 0.20. As he thought. Naruto nodded. Before he had checked the description, he had surmised that the storage in his name meant that the skill would allow him to manage the soldiers in some way. However, there was one thing he didn't expect. The storage limit was less than the summon limits. While he could summon 30 soldiers, he could only store 20 of them. That meant he would have to get rid of 10 more. Well, that's bullshit. It would be like biting off one of his fingers. Even getting rid of a single soldier was painful, and now he had to get rid of 10 of them. With a heavy heart, the ninja looked over his army. Of course, Igris and the mages would be excluded from the selection. That would leave the infantry. He decided to take the 10 soldiers further this time. I'm sorry. Naruto briefly prayed for his soul. The soldiers he selected turned into dust and scattered. Compared to the first time, the regret he felt lessened. They say that human beings can get used to anything. Anyway. Uzumaki looked at the remaining soldiers and used shadow storage. At the activation of the skill, Igris and the shadow soldiers melted like ice into the shadows. Then, his shadows flowed towards the blonde and entered his own shadow. So this is what the ability means by absorption of these. It was exactly as described by the skill. His army was absorbed into his shadow. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The army went directly to his shadow. Even after seeing him, he looked at his shadow in amazement. At this moment, he rang the system. You have used all class-specific skills. The class advancement has been completed. The output will now be created. Finally. It was a long and difficult road. Naruto took one last look around the dungeon. Traces of combat covered the area. Broken knights. Cracked walls. The destroyed pillar. And the one who destroyed the pillar, the iron golem, was now a pile of broken armor. But his trials had led to many great rewards. New class and skills. A powerful army. A smile appeared on Uzumaki's face. He turned around without a lingering thought. The portal to the real world awaited him. The shinobi passed through him. He returned to the clearing in the forest. It was the same place from where he had first entered the dungeon mission. The time was 5 a.m. The sun would rise soon. Good. Naruto looked at his watch and his mind was kicked. If he had known he was going to take so long, he should have told his sister. Fortunately, he had arrived late in the past due to last-minute missions. The blonde looked back. The portal he came out of had disappeared without a trace. As for the cleanup, everything that had happened felt like a dream. Wait, a dream? No, there is no way. Naruto looked around. Soldiers dressed in pitch black surrounded him. The shadow soldiers had left the moment he thought about them in his head. At first, he thought of them as monsters. The shadow soldiers. Monsters that were called from the shadows of the dead. If they were monsters, what would you call being able to create and control them freely? The blonde smiled. Well, he didn't care. He ordered the soldiers to enter his shadow again. The walk home felt as easy as walking downhill. Uzumaki slept for a long time. He couldn't help it. By the time he had gotten into his bed, the sun was already shining. What woke him up was the ringing of his apartment. With great difficulty, he got up and walked to the exit, rubbing his eyes that burned from the lack of sleep. He covered his yawn with his left hand, opened the door and was met by an Anbu. Uzumaki, Hokage requests your presence in his office. He looked at him up and down. Immediately, the shinobi disappeared silently. Quickly, he takes a light shower and dresses in his standard jounin uniform. A clone tosses him his tool bag, hooking the bag to his lower back, grabbing a kunai case, and attaching it to his right leg. Naruto knew that he could keep everything in his inventory, but he was more comfortable and attractive. No one would expect him to pull a dagger out of practically nothing. He left the apartment to head to the only big red building in the village. He entered his destination and hurried up the stairs, greeting a few acquaintances or strangers along the way. The secretary just nodded and he knocked on the door, entering a second later. He courtesy. His mother always yelled at him when he came into the office like Peter through his house. A warm feeling arose in his chest. They were memories that he missed and that he deeply regretted that his sister did not experience them. He bit his inner cheek. He had to focus on the now. Sarutobi, he was furiously writing some papers. Naruto cleared his throat to attract his attention. The Hokage sighed in relief and let himself rest in his chair. With his right hand he massaged his forehead. Thank God you showed up, Naruto, he said relieved. He stood up again. I will give you a mission personally. Team 7, Jounin Hada Kakashi, has requested support and reinforcement. Their mission was to escort the client to his homeland. Along the way they were attacked by Chunins. Who were? He asked with his jaw clenched. That's what I'm saying, Kiri's renegade ninjas. The Devil Brothers. Kakashi suspects that a renegade Jounin will eventually appear. He let out a sigh and grabbed his pipe. So your mission is to support Team 7. I'll be leaving right away, he informed. Naruto Sarutobi stopped him. Trust Hikari. Or lie. He trusted her, but her concern is always latent, he said seriously. I won't lose anyone else in my family. He left the office. Haruka was coming in with some papers. They both nodded at each other. After all, they were classmates at the academy, and after the Mizuki incident they had not crossed paths again. Hokage, here are the mission reports, he spoke, leaving the papers in front of Hiruzen. Naruto headed to the village gate. Without greeting Katetsu and Izumo, he continued on his way. He immediately began to jump between the trees, releasing a silent sigh. Wishing his sister wouldn't get into serious trouble. Chapter 28. Sasuke Hikari exclaimed. He threw a Fuma shuriken at her. His partner received it and smiled, trusting in Hikari's plan. Jumping back, he threw the object at his enemy, who laughed and caught the weapon. But upon seeing the other weapon just like the previous one, he jumps, letting the Fuma shuriken pass under his feet. An explosion behind the ninja and Hikari appeared, who threw a kunai at his enemy. The renegade shinobi dodged, removing his hand from the jutsu, where Kakashi was trapped. The ninja extended his hand ready to throw the weapon, but the team's Jounin used the back of his hand to stop him. Well done guys, excellent teamwork, Kakashi encouraged. But now it's my turn. Hikari swam to the edge of the lake. Sakura came over to help her out of it. Sasuke was protecting the client with a kunai. Both girls approached to help him and observe the fight. Both shinobi jumped back, the enemy starting with hand seals and Kakashi's sharingan following the movements. At the moment of falling into the water, at the feet of the opponents, the water shook and two water dragons appeared. Suiton. Shuriken no Jutsu, they both exclaimed at the same time. An incredible dragon fight broke out in the sky, at the foot of the confrontation. Kakashi and his enemy fought with his weapons, a kunai and a broadsword. They created a clash and paused there for a moment, trying to overpower the other with pure force. The jutsu was cancelled and both retreated. The enemy began to hesitate and made the first signs of a jutsu, but stopped when he saw that it was completely imitated. The Konoha ninja takes advantage of the opening to finish the seals. Suiton. Daibakufu no Jutsu, he exclaimed. His enemy was dragged out of the lake and hit a tree. Still dazed, he complained about the blow. Kakashi threw some kunai to stop him, and he fell on top of a tree. It's your end, Zabuza, the Jounin said. But before he could deliver his killing blow, some senbon stabbed into Zabuza's neck. With a grunt of pain, the renegade fell limply to the ground. Team 7 and Client exclaimed in surprise. Kakashi approached and took the pulse of his enemy and checked that there was no pulse. A boy with a mask appeared near his body. Hikari and Sasuke get into defensive positions. Calm down guys, he won't attack us, said Kakashi. He is an elite shinobi. Thank you, I've been chasing him for days, the shinobi thanked. The boy picked up Zabuza's body and disappeared from there. Hikari snorted in annoyance, and her classmates were also upset. I'm sorry for causing you so much trouble, you can rest at my house, said the Client. Well underway, Mr. Tazuna, lead the way, Kakashi said. Ongoing, exclaimed the old man. However, upon taking a step, Team 7 sensei fell to the ground. Sakura and Tazuna gasped in surprise. Hikari and Sasuke approached the Jounin. Hikari walked over to check if he has a pulse. He has a pulse, she sighed in relief. Then why has he fainted? Due to chakra exhaustion, said a voice. Sasuke and Sakura jumped out of inertia. Hikari took off from the ground with enthusiasm, rushing out to hug her brother, who just hugged her by her shoulders while she watches the scene of the fight. Well, we walk to your home, sir. You will inform me of the situation and the recent meeting, he said seriously. Each one must present himself with his name and category. Uzumaki Hikari, genin of Konoha, she said, seriously her sister. Uchiha Sasuke, genin, she spoke annoyed. Baruno Sakura, genin of Konoha. And you? Naruto asked the man. Hey? Tazuna, category. A Client, she said with doubts and nervousness. Uzumaki Naruto, Jounin of Konoha, mission support for Team 7, she greeted. Does Hikari have a brother? Sasuke asked himself. Hey, what's that for, the retreat complained. Naruto approached Kakashi, who was still lying on the ground. The teenagers were arguing and Tazuna was covering his ears, annoyed by the strident sounds. Carrying him like a bag of potatoes, he told the old man to lead them. After about 10 minutes, they arrived at a half-neglected house. Naruto placed Kakashi on his shoulder for the 5th time. His sister came next to him, drilling his head with anecdotes from the road. His companion snorted, annoyed by Hikari's energetic and inexhaustible voice. Secretly, both boys admired the infinite patience that the Redeed's brother had. Tazuna knocked on the door. A woman with a fearful look opened the door, but when she saw who it was, she was happy. Father, you have arrived safely, the woman said, relieved. Tsunami, these are the shinobi that have protected me along the way, she indicated. A pleasure, come in. She looked at Naruto for a moment and her gaze fell on the unconscious man. He is okay. Yes, it's exhaustion, he'll recover, the blonde replied. Thank goodness, I'll guide you to your rooms, the woman entered. The woman guides them upstairs and turns right. There were 3 doors in the hallway. It's not a big deal, but I hope you like it. The girls can sleep on the left and you gentlemen can sleep on the right, he pointed to each door. Naruto opened the door and Sasuke puts his things away. Kakashi is lying on the floor. The door is knocked and Hikari appears, bouncing with a big smile. Seeing her sensei, she calmed down and looked at her brother. They'll wake up in a while, she assured. The adults stood up. The genins followed them so as not to disturb and let his sensei rest. Around 10 in the morning, Kakashi wakes up and Tsunami walked in. She smiled excitedly at him. I see you've finally woken up. She rested her hands on her hips. I'll call your colleagues. A silver-haired Jounin entered trance, an uncomfortable feeling pushing against her head, as if something had slipped out of her hands. But no matter how much I searched, nothing for the moment. Sensei, 3 young voices exclaim. Eyes, she opened her eyes when she saw the figure behind them. Naruto. The teenagers looked between both Jounins. It seemed strange to them that their shameless sensei had a face of shame. And Naruto just a neutral face. Both looked like something had happened, something that was extremely uncomfortable for them. It's good to see you up, she commented. Yes, he murmured low and uncomfortable. Kakashi-sensei, are you okay? Hikari asked, unaware of the discomfort of both adult men. Oh yeah, he rested a hand on her chin. To end all this. Remember the tracking shinobi, think for a moment what he did with Zabuza's body. And what does that have to do with it, sensei? Sakura asked. Everything, Naruto stepped forward. Naruto, you're right, he looked in the blonde's direction. Anyway, the shinobi took Zabuza's body, why not take care of him immediately? What are the weapons he used to kill him? The teenagers stay quiet for a moment, analyzing every memory of the fight they faced in the early morning. Sasuke looked up, having the answer. Senbons, he used senbons, he replied. Maybe he took the body so we wouldn't see it, Sakura added. A ninja doesn't care that some children observed his work, Kakashi explained, tiredly. What are they chattering so much about? They already finished with that man, Tazuna complained. The truth is Kakashi sucked in air for a moment. Zabuza is still alive. At Hikari and Sakura exclaimed stunned. Both Tazuna and Tsunami widened their eyes in fear. But we saw his body, Hikari refuted. Kakashi-sensei, you checked his pulse yourself and said he was dead, Sakura stressed. Yes, he died, but it was just a state to simulate his death, Kakashi began to explain details of the ambush. That Anbu didn't care that Zabuza's body was heavier or bigger than him. In conclusion, he was trying to save him, the blonde contributed. You don't think you're exaggerating a bit, Tazuna tried. A shinobi must always be prepared for any misfortune, the moment he hesitates, chaos and despair begin. Any ninja knows this, Kakashi indicated. But Kakashi-sensei, how can we be ready when we could barely move? Sakura questioned worriedly. I can still train them, he chuckles. Wait a minute, last-minute training won't make us strong enough to face Zabuza, she demanded, annoyed. He could barely beat him with his Sharingan, we must be reasonable with this. Why was I able to defeat him? The sensei questioned. Because you helped me, especially you, Hikari. You have matured a lot. You noticed, it's not like that, I will become stronger and a hand is placed on her head. And you will train to survive, Naruto intervened seriously. But his sister tried. They still have a long way to go, a very long way, said the blonde. You'll see, everything will get better, I will be the strongest Kunoichi, she said enthusiastically. I don't doubt that, she smiles fondly at him. Kakashi watches the interaction between the brothers, Naruto encouraged his sister, but he also put his feet on the ground. The jounin of the team can't help but feel a certain nostalgia and affection, as well as shame. Nothing will start to get better, said a childish voice. Everyone turns around at the door, a little boy was the one who spoke. Black hair and eyes, a green planter and a light fisherman's hat. He had a grimace of annoyance. Inari, where had you gotten yourself into? Tazuna questioned with open arms. Grandpa, she ran to hug him. Welcome. Inari, that was very rude, Tsunami reproached. These shinobi were the ones who brought your grandfather safely. And? He asked scathingly. Okay. I'm rude too, said the old man, caressing his grandson's head. Mom, don't you see that these people are going to die at the hands of Kat and his men, the boy added firmly. What are you saying? Hikari claimed angrily. Listen to me carefully, you know that he is a super ninja, it's me and I will show you that you are wrong. That Plater Cat, or whatever it was called, is no match, and I will be a hero, so shut that mouth. Aha, you can't scream like that. Where are the manners I taught you? Naruto asked, covering his sister's mouth. That's not true, he spoke, looking at the ground and lifting her up. Heroes do not exist, you have stupid ideas. You can insult him, he uncovered the mouth of his sister, who looked at him stunned. You are strange, she stated. The boy walked to the door, clearly displeased by the visitors from his house. Tazuna stood up. Where are you going, Inari? He questioned worried. I'll go see the ocean, I want to be alone, he answered and closed the door. Excuse my grandson, asked the man, who left the room. Hikari leaves behind the old man, upset with the child and wanting to put him in her place. But as she goes up the stairs, she hears sobbing and approaches a barely open door, she looks through the opening. The boy was crying uncontrollably towards the sea, in his hands he had a photograph of a man. The young Uzumaki decides to retreat silently. She may not have known the reason for the child's desolation, but she had heard that cry as a child, her brother cried like that once. She doesn't remember it well, but maybe it was because of the death of a teammate. She doesn't know for sure. She walks to the door, where her team was with her brother. Her sensei was leaning on a pair of crutches, it was time for training, and she was excited. She would show her brother how cool she was. Taking a few steps away from the house, they walk to some trees, and Kakashi stands in front of his students. Naruto pulled away and looked at a system screen, which was blinking insistently. Daily quest has arrived. Chapter 29. The blonde sighs, the only advantage he had is that he had done the 10 kilometers. He prepared to continue with a list of exercises, while Team 7, after the Jounin's explanation, prepared to climb the trees with chakra. Naruto started to think. If he was able to raise a dead target, and if that target wasn't limited to a monster or a magical beast, he should be able to create a soldier from a dead shinobi, right? It was obvious, but he had avoided the idea because a human being was involved. And to think that he was going to create an undead soldier from the shadow of a dead man. Just the idea surprised him. Even so. What if I can make myself one of an A rank shinobi or the shadow of an S rank? The power he would gain would be beyond imagination. Even if the soldier could wield only 50% of his ancient powers, it would be enough for him to clear high-level quests and dungeons. His heart raced again. But Uzumaki shook his head. Even so, raising a human being as an undead is. It wasn't something he should do. No matter how much he increased his powers, he wanted to avoid doing so. Unless someone really deserved it. Even if an opportunity appeared, there was a moral problem. Humans were not monsters or magical beasts. Good. For now, he would be satisfied with his army. The shadow soldier who was level 7 and night grade. How powerful would he be? Naruto was looking forward to his next battle. A few days later they were having dinner at Izuna's house. Sakura had mastered the exercise quickly and was dedicated to protecting the client. Hikari and Sasuke took a long time to finish training due to their chakra. Kakashi has already fully recovered and Naruto was only dedicated to carrying out the daily mission. Right now there was a battle of who ate the most between Hikari, Sasuke and Naruto. Both teenagers choked and the older one laughed a little. I decided to withdraw from the strange competition and had a glass of water. This photograph, Sakura comments. Was it destroyed on purpose? He was my husband, Tsunami answers weakly. He was a man who was called a hero by this town, says Tazuna. Inari runs out and, behind the child, her mother. Whoever complained bothered her father. A few seconds of uncomfortable silence and Tazuna decided to tell the sad story of the deceased. Everyone was shocked and Hikari remembered the scene of the child crying his eyes out. She stood up and staggered, but she was able to stay on her feet. She turned around completely determined. I will show him that heroes exist, she says forcefully. No more training, you could die, Kakashi forbids. I don't care, he says with a frown. She looks at his brother, who sighs and nods. With a confident smile, she shoots outside the house. Kakashi demands him with his gaze. Even if I forbid it too, he will do it over me, he says, disinterested and with a sad aura. Like mom. Nobody says anything, both teenagers look at each other, without understanding anything. Naruto gets up and says goodbye to everyone present, going up to the room with heavy steps. The next day, Hikari appeared with an energetic smile. She received complaints from her brother, who claimed that she should have gone to sleep and not spent it outdoors, that she could catch a cold. She just looked down in shame, but then she excitedly recounted the encounter she had in the forest. He just looked at her carefully for a moment and then sighed with relief. Naruto, could you make me a braid? The young woman asks. No, she denies. Please, she begs and her eyes fill with tears. Please. Well. Just bring the fun comb. The entire situation observed by those present. Hikari stormed into the room. Tsunami approached. You're a good brother, he says with a smile. I have raised her since the day she was born. Sometimes it is good to fulfill a whim, he answers. Here shouts younger Uzumaki. Sit down, the blonde orders. Tsunami was still in shock from what was said earlier. Sakura, who already knew about this, was not surprised by the situation. Sasuke had a blank face, but his eyes had a pained gleam, and Kakashi just looked away. Naruto calmly combed his sister's red hair. It reminded him a lot of his mother and the afternoons where he caressed his mother's long hair. Tsunami decided to bring breakfast, and the blonde finished his work. Sakura approached and touched the beautiful braid maid. I envy the great work. She remembers where she came to the academy with beautiful hairstyles, sometimes half disastrous, but Hikari always showed it off with pride. She wanted a brother like that. Sasuke was drowning in memories of a dark past, of his family from when they were alive. His brother, his mother and his father. And that tragic night where his entire world was destroyed. Kakashi remembered those afternoons with his sensei and wife. The situation was the same. His team, his tragic missions and the death of each one. The Kyuubi attack and when he did what he shouldn't have. After breakfast, both boys continued training. The day was very calm, no cat attacks. The night arrived and with that dinner, everyone waited for the missing miners. We did it, the Uzumaki, who was leaning on the boy, celebrated tiredly. Hamid, says Sakura. In a few more days, we will finish the bridge. I want to thank you for that, says the old man. They must be very careful, asks his daughter. I haven't had the chance to ask before, she looks at them. Why did they stay to protect us if I tricked them into bringing them here? Those who deviate from the path of justice are cowards, but under the command of a great leader, cowardice does not survive, reflects the Jounin. Words from the Shadame Hokage. Inari, who was silent, looks at Hikari. Stormy memories flood her mind, memories full of pain for the person she came to consider her father. Her eyes fill with tears of fury and pain. But why? The boy questions with a trembling voice. What did you say? Uzumaki asks groggily. All those stupid workouts are a waste of time, he hits the table. Gato has a whole army, he is going to defeat them and destroy them, all those nice things they say mean nothing. No matter what they do, the strong wins and the weak always loses. That won't be in my case, she says disinterestedly. Why don't you shut up, seeing you makes me sick, she shouts. You don't know anything about this land, you're just a nosy person. Always laughing and playing, you don't know what suffering is. Complaining, as if you were the only one who suffers in life, she says angrily. If our presence bothers you so much, then leave. Hikari, go clear your head, Naruto asks. Tell me child, in your land, this one that we know nothing about and you do, are you the only one who suffers? And what does that matter? Does my suffering not matter? He questions annoyed. Your suffering is yours, but that does not mean that the suffering of others is less, nor yours compared to others, he says calmly. Everyone suffers in their own way, and that's okay. But what you do is forget the teachings of that man you miss so much, and you stain his memory. No, it's not true, he tries to deny. Suffering is suffering, only humans decide to classify pain compared to that of another. But we all forget that we suffer equally, she looks at him with intensity. Do you know the history of everyone in your town to know if your suffering is greater than that of others? Are you the only one who has lost a father, a mother, a brother, a friend? Do you know our personal stories? She murmurs. You are still young, you have strong legs, stop being on the ground and walk. Walk to your future and something better, stop it. Because no one can help you if you don't decide to move forward. I'll go see my sister. Good night. The blonde leaves the house, the boy runs to his room, and everyone freezes at the words of the Uzumaki brothers. Kakashi looks at the door where the brothers came out, releasing a sigh full of regret. Later, Inari sniffled at her, still sobbing. A solitary figure approached him, he looks ahead, and the sea seems exaggeratedly large and calm. Can I speak to you? Kakashi asks. Inari, try to understand them. They both have had a very hard life, they lost their parents the same day Hikari was born, his father died, and his mother was in a coma. But they don't hate you. They just want to be strong so they can protect and not lose anyone else. Chapter 30. The next day, Hikari was snoring on his futon. Naruto went out to do his daily exercise, they always asked him why he did it, he only responded. If I don't do it, there will be punishment. The other members of the team accompanied Tazuna, although Kakashi and Naruto did not exchange a word, they both knew that day Zabuza would appear with his partner. It would be the final battle of this mission. Why didn't anyone wake me up? Was the question that was heard throughout the house. Tsunami, who was cleaning the dishes, is startled by the shout and the hurried footsteps. The woman lets out a sigh and I smile, she turns around to face the younger Uzumaki. Your sensei said to rest, she says kindly. And my brother? She asks, putting on her ninja band. Some training or there would be punishment. I always say that he will come back crazy from a mission, she says plaintively. Okay, see you later. As a whirlwind hits the door, he jumps to a nearby tree and begins to advance there. However, she stopped momentarily when she saw a wild boar carcass. His skin was hurt by many cuts, Hikari approached to check the situation. Naruto fell to the ground softly, without a sound. He stretched his muscles and walked slowly back to the bridge, it was time for him to monitor the situation. With a little laziness he jumped through the trees. He found a dead wild boar, but the presence of someone else showed that they already knew the danger to the client's family. He hoped it was any of his teammates and not some loose end from Zabuza. He arrived in a hurry at the house, there were two men tied by a rope, Inari and her mother were attentively looking at the unconscious bodies. No one is hurt? She asks, falling into view of the civilians. Mr. Naruto, Inari squeals, excitedly. His sister helped us, we will go look for help in the town. So you decided to walk, he caresses the boy's head, who blushes. Yes, smiles big. You should go with your companions, Tsunami says kindly. Don't worry. Raising a hand in farewell, he jumps to move to the bridge. When he arrives he finds a very thick fog, in the distance an ice dome and his sister's partner taking care of the client. He searched thoroughly for the missing teenagers, but only saw the frozen silhouette of the Jounin. He rolled his eyes as he listened to the conversation. He never understood what the shinobi's need was to talk about who knows what, but he personally considered it a waste of time. Naruto never had that time for that, it was kill or be killed in his fights. You have activated stealth, you should surrender, says a voice. Never, Hikari exclaims tiredly. The enemy, of both teenagers, was reflected throughout the ice dome, as if they were mirrors. The genins were gasping for breath from all the agitation, they had senbons stuck all over their bodies like porcupines. Then they will die. Raising his hand the enemy launches his attack. Hikari was the most exposed and reacted slowly, Sasuke without fully understanding protected her with his body. Uzumaki gasps in terror, fearfully approaching her partner. Why did you save me? The girl asks horrified. No I don't know, she gasps lost. I hated you. You have what I always wanted and lost. Then why? Hikari rejoins. It does not make any sense. Why did you protect me? I never asked you to save me. I don't know, my body move just loses balance. Sasuke catch her friend. He's still out there, my brother. I promised myself, she says with a lost look. That he would live to kill him. He is truly a shinobi in his own right, worthy and honorable, she says. No, she denies. No, I won't forgive you. The girl launches into a blind rage attack, the opponent shakes his head and launches another attack. Hikari freezes on the spot as if she were paralyzed, she falls to the ground fainting. Now I have to help Zabuza, she says. Before that you must pass it to me, she said, a voice. In front of Hikari, Naruto's body appeared. The shinobi questioned where he had come from, but he couldn't make sense of it. He raises his hands to launch an attack, the blonde brings his dagger from his inventory and deflects the threatening needles. Suiton. Sensatsu Sushim, 1,000 flying water needles of death, the ninja whispers. Naruto jumps, dodging the first round, the second round soon approaches. The blonde was curious about his enemy, but now the important thing was to eliminate the enemy. Igris, the Konoha ninja, calls. From his feet, a taller silhouette emerges. His opponent trembles in the presence of the soldier, questions ran through the boy's mind. The shadow takes a step forward, the blonde steps back a little to give his soldier space. What's that? The enemy asked nervously. My soldier, he answers without interest. Now, what is your name? Igris grabs his heavy sword and swings it with ease, the enemy leaps to the side. Taking advantage of an opening, he stabs the soldier's side with a kunai. He narrows his eyes and moves his greatsword to ward off the human, who nervously lands inside a mirror. Boy, your name, Naruto orders. Haku prepares another attack. The knight passes through the mirror with ease, the sound of breaking glass filling the room. In the upper ice mirrors, Haku appears again, Igris throws his sword, again the enemy disappears. Drawing one of his daggers, he cuts off the piercing weapons. Haku appears behind him with his hands forming a seal, the atmosphere becomes colder, and the nearby water swirls on the ground to condense quickly. Heimdacham, he exclaims. The ice manipulation shinobi performs a series of slashes at the enemy with his senbon, and then gives him a series of kicks, ending the combo with an upward slash. Then, he kicks Igris up and takes the opportunity to create several ice spikes on the ground, so that the enemy is pierced when falling. Igris blinks indifferently at the attack, part of his body evaporating. Haku felt his victory on the tip of his tongue, but a shiver ran down his spine as he saw how the knight recovered again and his figure returned to normal. What the hell? The shadow steps forward again and kicks the ninja, then grabs a dagger. Haku crashes into another mirror and the jutsu is cancelled, the chakra having been completely depleted. Igris approaches and without thinking for a second he pierces the shinobi's chest. Naruto approaches the soldier, who kneels in front of him. Uzumaki pats the knight on the shoulder with some affection, congratulating him on his good performance in his test. It is a possible target for shadow extraction. It was the system screen on top of Haku's corpse, the blonde took a deep breath. Could he call the shadow of him? Or would it happen like Igris? They were the questions that ran through the Uzumaki's head, he was going to try to make the first shadow of him from a human. Arises. As if it were happening for the first time, Naruto's heart was pounding with excitement. He touched his chest in an attempt to normalize it, breathing in the humid atmosphere. A black hand emerges and rests on the ground to propel itself. Shadow extraction has been successfully performed. The black figure stood in front of Naruto, he had a hood and a floating screen appeared next to him. Shadow Mage LVL. 1 veteran grade. Both shadows slide to Naruto's feet, turning around he runs to where the two genins were, he let out a sigh full of relief that the system message did not appear in either of them. He would never forgive himself if his sister died. Gyutin. K's Nakunaru wind release. Dispersing wind performs Naruto. The bridge is clear, allowing easy viewing. Kakashi was with Raiten in his hands, Zabuza was anchored to the ground by some dogs, Sakura was still protecting the client. The atmosphere was tense, Naruto did not intervene, so that Zabuza died. What a great job, Zabuza, says a man at the foot of the bridge. I must say that I am disappointed. What is all this? Questions the injured man. You see, we had a plan, remember? The short man hits the ground with his cane 3 times. There was a change of plans, you will die here. The shinobi murmurs. You are very expensive, so I decided to pay these guys. They charge cheaper than you, he smiles mockingly. Look at you, you're like an angry kitten. The mercenaries behind the man, known as Gato, laughed uproariously. Zabuza furiously steps forward, ready to take the life of his employer. However, Naruto stops him. What are you doing? Questions the fugitive. We are no longer enemies, I don't care if you leave right now or die. That man is our objective, he looks at him out of the corner of his eye. If you get in the way anyway, you will die. Your choice. I'll help you, Naruto, Kakashi intervenes. You see, Kakashi, soon you won't be able to move, always wasting chakra, he huffs. I'm not the one to tell you how to manage it, after all I'm just an ordinary jounin. The mercenaries laugh loudly, Zabuza steps back despite his fury. Something in the blonde's gaze forced him back, something that made him cringe inside with fear. Naruto's shadow spread, ghostly figures emerged, each carrying a weapon. Both shinobi flinch at the sight, that wasn't normal. Not even for a lifelong ninja, that's saying a lot. Kakashi jumps as a black face passes by him. There were approximately 20 figures, 4 had hoods, and 1 had a helmet with red feathers. The hired bandits back away, the short man steps back nervously, but he furiously hits the ground with his cane. What are you waiting for? Attack, what am I paying them for, he orders with fury and fear in his body. The mercenaries attack with a war cry, the infantrymen were the first to fight them, Igris was a few centimeters behind the blonde without moving, the entire fight was summarized in a merciless slaughter. The soldiers were too strong for the mercenaries, or those who managed to attack the soldiers regenerated without stopping. Some tried to escape only to be burned to death by the mages, a few were frozen by Haku's lone shadow. Gato, seeing how his people were decimated, quickly tries to escape, but Nami's people were gathered. Ignoring that a few meters away there were creatures beyond their logic and the mercenaries succumbing to the forces of the soldiers. You will pay dearly, Cat, an angry man shouts. Zabuza, help me, he begs. I'm sorry, but I won't help the person who wanted to kill me, he disengages easily. Zabuza. Zabuza, the short man shouts. The crowd comes to give him what he deserves and vent their fury for so many years under Gato's tyranny. The shadows return to the main shadow of his lord, Zabuza falls to the ground injured and with no reason to fight. The deserter's gaze falls on his fallen companion, his eyes fill with tears, and he couldn't understand why. He walks over and picks up the boy's body. Zabuza, go, Naruto says seriously. Ah, child, he sighs defeated. Picking up his sword and carrying Haku's body, he limps away from the scene in silence. His pride as a shinobi was trampled, but he didn't care much either. He squeezed the limp body he was carrying and caressed her cheek lovingly. That child had been a reason why he continued fighting as a mercenary. Let's go home, Haku, he murmurs painfully. Nami's people celebrate when she unleashes her fury against the tyrant of her town. Sakura was crying on the chest of her crush, but her hand was holding her friend. Naruto smiles and approaches, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. They're alive, he eases Sakura and Kakashi's worries. Sakura's cries increase in volume, relieved by the terrifying fate of her classmates. Kakashi approaches and slowly removes the senbons from the body of his students, who groaned in pain, still unconscious. Kakashi-san, Naruto-san, and Nari approaches with a happy look. Thank you. Why do you thank me? Naruto questions. You have achieved it, you have walked. The boy's eyes open and fill with tears, he hugs the blonde's legs tightly, who caresses his hair lovingly. His paternal side came to light, his weakness was children because to some extent they reminded him of his younger sister, whom he raised at a young age. Azuna approaches and picks up her grandson, who clings more calmly to the old man's neck. The man bows briefly and offers them lodging until they recover. Uzumaki and Haddock picked up the unconscious children. Sakura followed them, attentive to any reaction from her teammates. She was worried and prayed to the gods for her well-being. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.